Hey everyone, welcome to Paranormal M. Before we get into tonight's stories, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications if you want to catch the next video. The first story tonight is from someone who usually tries to find a logical explanation for strange things, but there were a few experiences that he just couldn't explain, even after trying. Anyway, get comfortable, settle in, and I hope you have a good night and sleep well. These last few years have been strange in a way I still have trouble putting into words. I've lived in two houses where things happened that I couldn't explain. At first, I tried to brush it all off. Old houses make noises. Pipes knock, floors settle. Your mind plays tricks on you when you're exhausted. I know all of that. But there was one night when I finally decided that my girlfriend at the time and I needed to leave the second place, when I saw something that still bothers me. I don't usually tell people about it, not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I know how it sounds. The second you start talking about shadows, strange presences, or things moving where nothing should be moving, people start looking at you differently. So I kept most of it to myself. After leaving that house, I stayed for a while with a woman I've always called my aunt. She isn't actually related to me by blood. She was one of my mother's closest friends years ago, long before I was old enough to understand any of that. For this story, I'll call her Sarah. Sarah's house was different from the other places. The atmosphere there felt heavy. That's the simplest way I can explain it. The house sits in a small Wyoming railroad town, barely more than an alley away from the tracks. Freight trains pass close enough that you can feel the vibration through the ground. And that area has history. Railroad towns out there weren't always peaceful little places. A lot of people came and went. There were accidents, violence, hard lives, and generations of stories that disappeared with the people who lived them. But what bothered me most wasn't the town. It was what had supposedly happened inside that specific house. Before Sarah bought it, another family lived there, a married couple with several children. One of their sons began behaving in ways the family eventually described as something much darker than ordinary teenage problems. They believed something had attached itself to him. Possession is the word they used. I'm careful with that word because I wasn't there when most of it happened, and I'm not pretending I can prove what caused it. But years later, I met both the mother and the son. I saw the scars across his back, and I listened to them describe what their family had gone through while living in that house. The strange part is that finding them wasn't difficult. While Sarah and her husband were in the process of buying the property, the previous owners were going through a divorce. Not long afterward, the former wife became involved with a man living nearby and moved into his house with the children. So the family that wanted out of that house never really left the neighborhood. They were practically next door. I always found that unsettling. If I truly believed something powerful and dangerous had affected my child inside a house, I don't think I could stay close enough to see the roof from my kitchen window. But that was their decision. Then something happened that changed everything for Sarah's family. Her daughter disappeared. She wasn't just Sarah's daughter to me. She had been one of my closest friends for most of my life. Eventually, she was found after a vehicle went over a cliff. I'm not going to describe all the details. Some things deserve more respect than that. What I will say is that, before her death, her behavior had changed dramatically. She had recently returned to Wyoming after a relationship fell apart in another state and had moved back into her mother's house. After that, things seemed to spiral. Her decisions became increasingly reckless and frightening. There were personality changes that people around her struggled to understand. At the time, I wondered whether trauma, grief, mental health, or substance use could explain it. Those are always the first explanations I consider. But later, Sarah's husband began behaving in disturbingly similar ways. Different circumstances, different person, but the progression felt almost identical. Even the timing was strangely close. That was when I started asking myself whether there was something about that house that none of us understood. Now, I need to explain something about myself because I know how all of this sounds. I'm not someone who automatically assumes every strange noise is a ghost. Actually, my instinct is usually the opposite. I spent years learning how to question what I was seeing. I served 2 combat deployments in Iraq. My first was in the mid-2000s. A few years later, I volunteered for another deployment with a close friend, and we returned home in the spring of 2010. Between deployments, I attended the University of Wyoming. I studied neuroscience for a while, especially how trauma affects the brain and nervous system. I later moved into kinesiology and rehabilitation sciences. I even began exploring civil engineering before military service interrupted that path. Life moved quickly after that. I was married for about a decade. I have 2 sons. The marriage eventually ended, and a few years later, I moved east for a while, living in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Eventually, Wyoming pulled me back. I settled in the southwestern part of the state, partly because I had become serious about rock hounding. There's something grounding about spending hours searching through stone and desert terrain. Rocks don't lie to you. They don't change because you're tired. They're either there or they aren't. Maybe that's one reason I became so interested in understanding experiences that don't fit neatly into normal explanations. These days, I'm also working on a book about recovery, trauma, and rebuilding my life after war. Proper treatment helped me understand how much combat had affected the way my brain responded to stress, danger, memory, and uncertainty. That education actually made me more skeptical of paranormal experiences, not less. When something strange happens, I start looking for ordinary explanations. Sleep deprivation, stress, environmental factors, faulty wiring, animals in walls, reflections, memory distortion, trauma responses, carbon monoxide. Anything that can explain what happened without jumping straight into the supernatural. Most strange experiences fall apart once you examine them closely. I'd say I can explain the overwhelming majority of things people initially call paranormal. But not everything. There are still a handful of experiences I've had that refuse to fit into any explanation I know. And several of those experiences didn't happen when I was alone. Other people were standing beside me. They saw the same thing. They heard the same sound. They reacted before I even said anything. Those are the moments that stay with me. Because when 2 or 3 people suddenly turn toward the same empty hallway at the exact same second, it becomes harder to dismiss what happened as imagination. There were also a couple of incidents where I was completely alone. Those bother me more. Not because they were necessarily more frightening, but because there was nobody else there to confirm what I saw. All I had were my own eyes and my own judgment. And I've spent years questioning both. Maybe that's why I've kept these stories mostly private. I'm comfortable saying, I don't know. I think more people should be. I'm not claiming I understand what was in Sarah's house. I'm not claiming every tragedy connected to that place was supernatural. Human beings are complicated enough without ghosts. Trauma alone can destroy families. Grief can change people. Mental illness can change people. Addiction can change people. Sometimes terrible things happen for completely ordinary reasons. But I also can't ignore the things I personally witnessed. The sounds, the movement, the feeling of something entering a room before anything visible happened. The moments when another person looked at me and I knew, without either of us speaking, that we had both just experienced the same impossible thing. That's why I'm finally talking about it. Not because I need anyone to believe me, and definitely not because I want to convince people that demons are hiding behind every basement door. I just have stories I can't explain. Some happened in those first 2 houses. Some happened at Sarah's place. And one particular night near those railroad tracks still makes the hair on my arms rise when I think about it. For a long time, I wasn't sure what to do with any of these experiences. Maybe telling them is enough. Maybe someone listening has experienced something similar. Or maybe someone will hear one of these stories and immediately recognize a perfectly reasonable explanation I somehow missed. I'm open to that too. But this is where it starts. A house beside the railroad tracks. A family that believed something followed their son. Another family that moved in afterward. A series of tragedies and behavioral changes that seemed disturbingly familiar. And me, standing in the middle of it, trying to decide where coincidence ended and something much stranger began. I was 16 when this happened, and even now, whenever I think about that night, there are parts of it that still make my stomach tighten. My parents and I spent most of the year overseas, so our house back home usually sat empty. That particular week, though, some relatives were helping with repairs. My older cousin, who I'll call Ravi, was there, along with one of my uncles, another cousin from my mom's side, his friend, and two of my close friends who were supposed to sleep over. The guys planned to head home after dinner. That was the plan anyway. Dinner turned out to be incredibly plain, and my uncle and Ravi decided they wanted something better. They suggested buying some fresh chicken and lamb and grilling it. My mother was strict about meat being brought inside our house, so we couldn't cook there. Instead, someone suggested going to my grandmother's old family home, which was only a short walk away. The problem was the route. There was a patch of unused land beside my grandmother's property that almost everyone in the area avoided after dark. Years earlier, a woman had been killed there. People claimed they had seen her standing around the property during the daytime, usually from a distance. At night, the stories became worse. Some people said she chased them. Others said they heard her following them, even when nothing was visible. Growing up in a rural area, you hear these stories constantly. You learn certain rules too. One of those rules was very simple. Don't carry raw meat past a place where something is believed to be haunting the land. I knew that. I went anyway. Peer pressure is a powerful thing when you're 16 and surrounded by people laughing about how nothing is going to happen. So there we were, walking straight past this place in the dark with bags of raw meat. None of us looked directly toward the land. I remember that very clearly. Everyone suddenly became fascinated with the road in front of them. At first, nothing happened. There was only a strange drop in temperature as we passed the property, and for a moment, I thought I heard whispering somewhere behind us. It was faint enough that I convinced myself it was probably leaves or insects. We reached my grandmother's house and decided to cook everything on the terrace. The terrace was huge. The guys dragged up a metal bucket, filled it with coal, and set up this little handheld grill over it. Soon they were cooking corn, chicken, and pieces of lamb. For a while, everything felt normal again. People were talking. Someone was laughing. The food smelled good. Then my phone rang. It was a friend of mine from school overseas, so I walked toward the far side of the terrace to talk privately. That was when I noticed the silence. Not normal nighttime silence. Complete silence. There had been insects before, frogs, birds somewhere in the trees. Suddenly, there was nothing. All I could hear was my own voice on the phone. Then the air became cold. Not cool, cold. I immediately ended the call. I turned around and started walking back toward everyone else, and for one horrible second, I couldn't see them. The terrace was large enough that part of it was hidden from where I stood, but in that moment, my brain convinced me that everyone had gone downstairs and left me alone. Then I saw them again. I felt ridiculous for being so relieved. I stayed closer to the group after that, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that someone was watching us. Eventually, I started looking around at the surrounding houses. I thought maybe a neighbor was on another rooftop. That's when I saw her. There was a woman standing on a terrace about 2 houses away. She was wearing a red floral dress. Nothing unusual about the dress itself. It was the rest of her. She was incredibly tall. Not just tall in the ordinary sense. Her body looked wrong somehow, long and narrow, almost stretched. Her hair hung over most of her face. At first, I thought maybe that was a good thing. Then she moved slightly, and I saw underneath it. Her face looked badly damaged. One side appeared torn open around the cheek and jaw. I could see what looked like exposed teeth beneath the skin. One eye was pale and empty looking, while the other was dark, irritated, almost red. And she was staring directly at me. That's the part I still don't understand. She was far enough away that I shouldn't have been able to see that much detail, but I could. Perfectly. I couldn't look away. Usually, when I see something strange, my instinct is to pretend I didn't see it. Not that night. I just stood there staring. For some reason, I expected her to move. I thought she might run across the rooftops, or disappear and suddenly appear beside us. Instead, she simply watched me. I turned toward one of my friends and whispered, "I think she came with us." My friend went completely pale. I told my uncle. He didn't panic, but his entire expression changed. He quietly told everyone that maybe we should pack everything up. Before we could, my cousin's friend came over from the opposite side of the terrace. He looked genuinely shaken. He had been taking photos near the edge when he noticed someone standing on another rooftop. A tall woman, red dress, long hair. He hadn't seen her face clearly, but everything else matched what I had seen. He grew up in the city and wasn't used to stories like this, so he wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. He told my cousin, "I'm going downstairs." That was enough for everyone. The guys threw the cooked food into containers as quickly as possible. They left the grilling equipment upstairs. There was even half-cooked lamb still sitting on it. Nobody cared. We rushed downstairs and woke my grandmother. When we explained what happened, she immediately went upstairs and locked the terrace door. I called my mother. What scared me almost as much as the woman was how unsurprised my mother sounded. She had apparently seen the same figure before, more than once. She wasn't dismissive. She just said we needed to leave carefully. Before we went home, my grandmother insisted everyone shower because we had eaten meat. She wanted to walk back with us too, but she was already in her late 80s. Even though she was ridiculously healthy for her age, none of us wanted her outside near that place at night because of something stupid we had done. Eventually, we left. My maternal cousin and his friend walked to where they had parked their motorcycle and rode away. Ravi and my uncle brought me back home. After that, they drove my 2 friends home too, because neither of them wanted to stay over anymore. Honestly, I didn't blame them. I spent most of the night calling everyone to make sure they had made it safely. By around 2 in the morning, I finally tried to sleep. I shared the room with my mother, and my bed was beside a window. I locked it before lying down. Sometime around 2:40 or 2:45, I woke up because I heard a knock. Just one. Tap. A few seconds passed, then another. Tap. I stayed completely still. It happened again, and again. Slowly, the knocking became faster. Then it turned into scratching. Something was dragging across the window. My mother was asleep beside me, which was unusual because she was normally the light sleeper. I started shaking her awake. I didn't even want to look toward the window. For the few minutes I was focused on waking her, the scratching stopped. When she finally woke up and asked what was wrong, I panicked and said, "Nothing." I don't know why. Maybe saying it out loud would have made it real. Eventually, I fell asleep again. Later, maybe around 3:30, I opened my eyes. There was something standing inside the room. A tall, narrow silhouette. I could only see its outline in the darkness. It reminded me immediately of the woman on the terrace. I wasn't paralyzed. I could have moved. I just didn't. I was too scared. So I lay there staring at it. It stood completely still for what felt like several minutes. Then it moved away into the darkness. I woke up around 5 in the morning as if nothing had happened. Except I was so frightened that I didn't even want to walk to the bathroom alone. By 6, I started calling everyone again. That's when things became stranger. My cousin and his friend told me that while riding home through some fields, they saw the woman again. She was standing beside the road. Red dress, tall figure. Just watching them. They drove past without stopping. During the rest of the ride, they nearly crashed 3 separate times. Both ended up with minor cuts and bruises. My cousin blamed the motorcycle. He said it was old and struggling because his friend was a bigger guy. Maybe, but they had ridden together plenty of times before. Nothing like that had ever happened. His friend also woke from a nightmare about the woman and developed a fever the next morning. My 2 friends reached home without any major problems. One of them had a strange dream about an unfamiliar woman trying to lie beside her, but the woman in the dream looked completely normal. Ravi had a much stranger experience. While riding home, he saw a cow standing in the road. He said its eyes looked wet and red, almost as if they were bleeding. Suddenly, it charged toward him. He sped away. According to him, the animal followed until he passed a small temple. Then it stopped. Later that night, he woke up and saw the woman standing inside his bedroom. Unlike me, he said he could see her clearly. By morning, he also had a fever. My uncle never saw anything afterward, but strangely enough, he woke up with a mild fever too. At that point, we finally did the one intelligent thing people in horror stories are apparently incapable of doing until the final act. We asked for help. All of us went to a temple. We were blessed, prayers were performed, and someone experienced with these kinds of rituals told us what we needed to do. Part of it involved returning to the area near the haunted land. On foot. We had to leave offerings there. Food, cloth, a little jewelry, perfume. Then we had to walk home without speaking, no matter what we heard. That last part terrified me. We left everything where we were told and started walking back. Nobody spoke. About halfway home, I heard a voice behind me. It was deep but unmistakably feminine. It sounded furious. It started cursing at me. Not shouting exactly, more like speaking directly behind my shoulder. Every instinct in my body told me to turn around. I didn't. I kept walking. The entire way home, I could feel something behind me. Close. Following. But none of us looked back. And after that night, nothing happened again. No knocking, no figures in the bedroom, no woman in red. Nothing. Still, whenever someone laughs about haunted places or says they would definitely investigate if they ever saw something supernatural, I think about that terrace. I think about that woman staring at me from 2 rooftops away. And I think about the one lesson I learned very quickly at 16. If the local people tell you not to carry raw meat past a haunted field at night, maybe don't turn it into a group activity. So a few months ago, my boyfriend and I agreed to house sit for some friends while they were overseas. We were there for just under a month in this old weatherboard place in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. It had creaky floors, high ceilings, that sort of thing, but nothing about it seemed particularly creepy at first. The first week was completely normal. Then one night, my boyfriend and I were in the shower when we both heard someone knock on the front door. Not a vague sound, not the house settling. 3 very clear knocks. And for some reason, I immediately panicked. That was actually the strangest part at first, because I'm not normally someone who gets frightened by a knock at the door. But I remember standing there with this sudden, horrible feeling that he shouldn't go and answer it. Of course, he got out, threw some clothes on, and checked. There was nobody there. No one on the porch, no one walking away, nothing. We tried to laugh it off. Then, at around 3 in the morning, the smoke alarm started screaming. We jumped out of bed and checked everything. Nothing was burning. The stove was off. There was no smoke anywhere. My boyfriend took the alarm down and said he saw a little insect inside it, so we figured that must have triggered it. And honestly, that explanation made sense. For a few days after that, nothing happened. Then one evening, the lamp in the living room started flickering constantly. It was an old lamp, so again, not exactly paranormal. We assumed there was something wrong with the bulb or the wiring. But later that night, something happened that I still can't quite explain away. My boyfriend got up to use the bathroom sometime after midnight. I was half asleep, drifting in and out, when I heard one of the piano keys in the other room being pressed. Just one soft note. Then, a few seconds later, the same note again. By then, I was completely awake. And then it happened a third time. 1 key. 3 separate presses. I remember lying there completely still, telling myself it was probably the piano settling somehow. I didn't wake my boyfriend. I didn't want to talk about it. I just pulled the blanket up and tried to convince myself to go back to sleep. The next morning, things got stranger. The bedroom door had shut during the night, and it was locked from the inside. We were staying in the guest room, and this particular door had one of those old locks that needed a proper key. The problem was, there wasn't a key in the house. Our friend Emma had accidentally taken it with her overseas. We checked the windows. There hadn't been any strong wind. There wasn't enough airflow through the room to slam the door shut anyway, and even if there had been, that still wouldn't explain how it locked. After that, the entire atmosphere of the house seemed to change. Or maybe we changed. I don't know. But the silence started feeling heavy. That's the only way I can describe it. There were moments when I'd be standing in the kitchen doing something completely ordinary, like rinsing plates, and suddenly I'd get this overwhelming feeling that I needed to finish what I was doing and leave the room. I remember one evening putting dishes into the dishwasher and thinking very clearly, just put these away. Don't look behind you. Just finish and get out. There was no sound. Nothing had moved. But I was genuinely frightened to turn around. Eventually, we reached the final couple of days of the house sit, and by that point, I was counting down the hours. On the second to last morning, I went out to the car first while my boyfriend finished getting ready. I was sitting there scrolling through my phone when I heard the front door close behind him. I remember that sound specifically because it was what made me put my phone down and start the engine. He got into the car and we drove to work. When we came back that evening, the front door was wide open. Completely open. We both just stood there staring at it. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing seemed disturbed. The windows were fine. There were no signs that anyone had been inside. And the door itself worked perfectly. We closed it, locked it, checked it twice. Everything was normal. That night we went to bed knowing we only had one more night left. I was half asleep sometime around 2 in the morning. My boyfriend was still awake beside me, looking at his phone. And then we heard it. A man screaming. It sounded like it came from right near the front entrance. Not someone yelling in the street. Not laughter. Not a drunk person passing by. It was this deep, guttural scream that lasted maybe 4 or 5 seconds. It was horrible. Then it stopped. No footsteps, no voices, no car driving away. Just silence. My boyfriend and I looked at each other, and neither of us moved for a while. We seriously considered leaving right then, but we only had one night left, and somehow we convinced ourselves to stay until morning. As soon as the sun came up, we packed everything. Bags in the car, sheets stripped, keys ready. We just wanted to leave. And then, when we tried to close the front door behind us, it wouldn't close. At all. The exact same door we had shut and locked perfectly the previous evening had somehow become so badly misaligned overnight that the latch wouldn't even reach the frame. We pushed it, pulled it, lifted it slightly. Nothing worked. In the end, we had to call a locksmith. He adjusted the hinges and the strike plate, got the door working again, and the second he was finished, we left. Fast. And look, I know almost everything that happened in that house probably has some rational explanation. The smoke alarm could have been the insect. The lamp could have had faulty wiring. The piano could have shifted somehow. The scream could have been someone outside. The door could have warped. Maybe. But I still think about the way everything seemed to begin with someone knocking on that front door and ended with that same door refusing to close. I've never felt fear inside a house the way I felt it there. And whether there was actually something strange happening or not, I can tell you one thing. I was very happy to never sleep in that house again. I've had a few strange encounters during my time in the police force, but there are two that have stayed with me all these years. The first happened sometime in 1989, when I was still serving as an SC and attached to the East Coast Park Police Post. That night, I was on the night shift with 2 regular officers and 2 other SCs. It had been raining almost non-stop, so we couldn't carry out our usual bicycle patrols along the park. Sometime around 3:40 in the morning, our team IC, the late PC Hamid, told us to get into the police jeep and do a patrol instead. Hamid was driving, and I sat in the front passenger seat. The other 2 guys were seated behind us. By then, the heavy rain had eased into a light drizzle. We drove slowly along the bicycle track, somewhere not too far from that old yellow lighthouse tower. After a while, the headlights caught a small fallen tree lying across the track. Hamid stopped the jeep and told us to get down and move it aside. I went over to the root end of the tree while the others took the branches. I remember looking down, trying to get a proper grip because everything was wet and slippery. Just as we lifted it, I heard the leaves above me suddenly rustling. Then something moved. There was a quick, heavy sound, almost like a monkey leaping from the fallen tree onto another tree nearby. I didn't actually see what jumped because I was still looking down, but at that exact moment, every hair on the back of my neck stood up, and the temperature seemed to change instantly. It became unbelievably cold. Not the normal cool feeling you get after rain. This was different. It was a sudden, sharp chill that went right through me. Then I heard my 3 partners shouting. Not joking, not laughing. They were screaming. Hamid shouted, "Get back in the Jeep, now!" Nobody argued. We dropped everything, jumped into the Jeep, and Hamid slammed his foot on the accelerator. As we sped away, I could hear this strange, high-pitched sound coming from the trees behind us. For the first few minutes, nobody said much. Then Hamid started speaking quietly in Malay to the other 2 guys. The 3 of them were Malay, while I was the only Chinese officer there, although I could understand enough Malay to follow some of the conversation. I finally asked him, "What happened? What did you all see?" He looked at me and asked, "You didn't see it?" I told him no. I explained that I only heard the leaves moving and something jumping into the nearby tree. I also told him about the sudden cold and how the hair on my neck had stood up. That was when he told me. According to all three of them, when we lifted the fallen tree, they saw what looked like a Pontianak emerge from it and leap into the tree beside us. All three of them saw the same thing. Now, these guys could joke around. I had worked with them long enough to know that. But when I looked at their faces that night, I knew they weren't playing around. There was genuine fear in their eyes. And even if they had somehow planned some elaborate prank, it still wouldn't explain what I personally experienced. That sudden chill, the feeling on the back of my neck, and that terrible high-pitched sound following us from the trees. That was my first encounter with something I could not explain while serving in the force. But it wasn't the last. My second experience happened the following year, in 1990. After completing my national service at the end of 1989, I applied to join the police force as a regular officer. I was accepted, went through about 6 months of training, and was eventually posted to F Division. As a rookie, I had to spend my first few months attached to a field training officer. My mentor was Corporal Osman. One night, Osman and I were patrolling in our patrol car. After finishing a roadblock operation, we decided to take a short break. Back then, officers had a few unofficial places where we would stop for a little rest during a quiet night shift. One of those places was deep inside the Seletar Reservoir area. In those days, that part of Singapore was very different from what it is now. It was isolated, dark, and extremely quiet. The location was somewhere around the area where a country club stands today, not far from Yushun Dam. Osman was driving while I was busy updating our patrol log. Back then, everything had to be handwritten. Every patrol, every check, every incident went onto paper. We were already quite deep inside the reservoir area when Osman suddenly stopped the car. Without saying much, he opened the door and stepped outside. I stayed inside because I was still writing. Our headlights were on, so I had a clear view of the road ahead. I watched Osman walk to the front of the patrol car. Then he appeared to start talking to somebody. The strange thing was, I couldn't see anybody there. I could only see Osman. After a while, he took out his radio and contacted our operations room. He gave them an NRIC number and requested a check. At that point, I was completely confused. About 5 minutes later, he came back to the car looking annoyed. He opened the door and said, "Oi, what are you doing sitting inside? Didn't you see me checking that woman? Why didn't you come out and assist me? What if she was wanted and suddenly ran?" I stared at him. I said, "Sir, what woman? I didn't see anyone. I only saw you standing there talking by yourself." Before I could finish the sentence, bang! Something landed on the roof of the patrol car. Both of us froze. Then came this awful scratching sound. Long, slow scratches dragging across the metal roof. It sounded exactly like fingernails scraping across one of those old classroom blackboards. And mixed in with the scratching was a high-pitched female voice. Every hair on my arms and neck stood up. Osman didn't say another word. He stepped on the accelerator and we got out of there as fast as that patrol car could take us. We didn't stop until we reached a petrol station some distance away. Under the bright lights, both of us finally got out. We looked at each other for a moment before checking the roof of the patrol car. There were several deep, parallel scratch marks running across it. They looked disturbingly like they had been made by long fingernails. For a while, neither of us knew what to say. We stood there smoking cigarettes, staring at the scratches and wondering how on earth we were going to explain this to the transport sergeant when we returned the vehicle. Eventually, Osman said, "Look, if we tell them what really happened, nobody is going to believe us." I nodded. He was right. Our team would laugh at us. The watch officer would probably think we had lost our minds. So Asman came up with another explanation. He said, "We'll tell them we saw 3 suspicious men inside the reservoir area. They ran, we gave chase, and some low tree branches scratched the roof." I looked at the marks again. Then I said, "That definitely sounds more believable than the truth." And that was exactly what we reported the following morning. Whether you believe these stories or not is entirely up to you. All I can say is that I was there. I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And after those nights, I stopped being so quick to dismiss stories about things we cannot explain. Those weren't my only strange experiences during my years in the police force either. There were others, but those are stories for another time. My oldest son came into the world a little earlier than expected, just before Christmas in 2009, even though we weren't expecting him until sometime in January. From the beginning, he had this remarkable relationship with language. He talked early, and once he started, there was almost no stopping him. If I used a word he didn't recognize, he wouldn't just let it slide. He'd ask, "What does that mean?" So I'd explain it. Then he'd repeat the word back to me in a completely different sentence, just to make sure he understood it. And after that, somehow, it would become part of his vocabulary forever. His younger brother was almost the complete opposite in that way. His brother has Down syndrome, and speech, reading, and writing have always been much harder for him. But he has his own gifts. He loves people with his entire heart. He notices when someone is hurting. He comforts, nurtures, and somehow seems to bring calm wherever he goes. They've always been gifted in very different ways. But anyway, when my oldest was around 2, he started telling me something that always made me laugh. "You're my favorite mom." And I would smile because, well, I was his only mom. I figured he just didn't quite understand what favorite meant yet. He was 2. Eventually he'd work it out. Then one afternoon, when he was about 3, he said it again. "You're my favorite mom." I laughed and leaned over to hug him, but he pulled back, looked straight at me, completely serious, and said, "No, of all the mums I've ever had, you're my favorite." That stopped me for a second, and there was something else unusual about him. From almost the moment he started speaking clearly, he had a British accent, a strong one. The problem was, he had been born and raised in Colorado. We weren't British. None of our relatives were British. None of our close friends spoke that way. He wasn't watching British television programs all day. I was a stay-at-home mom at the time, so I had a pretty good idea of what he was hearing and where he was hearing it. And I could not figure out where that accent came from. It was convincing enough that strangers noticed it. More than once, older women approached us in public and asked where our little British boy was from. One woman at a festival was convinced she recognized the region his accent came from. Another asked us about it while we were eating breakfast at a restaurant. We never knew what to say. "No, actually, he's from Colorado." That usually made the conversation a little strange. So, back to the day when he told me I was his favorite mother out of all the mothers he'd ever had. Later that afternoon, I was trying to get him down for a nap. He had been having trouble sleeping, so our routine was that I would tuck him into my bed, read him a couple of stories, and then lie beside him until he drifted off. Except he rarely drifted off. Usually we ended up lying there for nearly an hour, talking about whatever happened to be floating around inside his 3-year-old mind. That day, I had just finished reading one of his favorite books for what felt like the 1,000th time. I closed it, set it aside, and we were lying there quietly when he suddenly asked me, Do you know how I died before I became your son? I remember just staring at him. At the time, I was a very committed Christian, and reincarnation simply wasn't part of my beliefs. I had grown up in the Southern Baptist world in South Carolina. Christian school, church, Bible classes, all of it. I married my high school sweetheart when I was still very young. So this wasn't an idea I had ever taught my child. And he was 3. I genuinely had no idea where the question had come from. I finally said, "No? Do you want to tell me?" And he did. He told me that he had been jumping from one enormous rock to another. He said the rocks were really, really big. Then he said he missed one. He fell. After that, according to him, a very loud truck came. He said several men wearing the same kind of clothes ran toward him. They used some kind of machine that, in his words, put lightning in my chest. As he said this, he spread his fingers across his chest and jerked his body upward, almost acting it out. Then he told me something I still remember very clearly. He said, "I was way up high when I watched them do it." He told me he kept going higher and higher. Then, he said, God told him, "It's not your time." And he said he suddenly slammed back down. He woke up in a bright white room. He remembered white socks. He remembered loud beeping noises. Then he rushed through the next part, almost as though he was afraid I might interrupt him. But they couldn't fix my body, so I died. And then his whole face lit up. "And I became your son." He said that last part with absolute joy. To him, it wasn't frightening. It was wonderful news. I didn't know what to make of it. Years later, I shared the story online. Some people who read it started searching through old records and found the obituary of a British man who had worked as a professional mountain rescue climber. He had died during a rescue operation in Alaska. His name was John. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not claiming that proves anything. But there were a few details those people online didn't know. For as long as I can remember, whenever my son created a character in a video game and had to give that character a name, he almost always chose the same one. John. Years after his strange little story, we took a family road trip through Alaska. I had never seen that child so peaceful. He was usually my whirlwind kid, always moving, always talking, always turning life into some sort of grand experiment. But in Alaska, he became quiet. I remember watching him stand in front of those enormous mountains, completely still. He just stared at them. There was this look on his face that I still can't fully describe. It didn't feel like a child seeing something beautiful for the first time. It felt almost like recognition. There's a photograph of him from that trip, standing there looking across the mountains, and it has always been one of my favorite pictures of him. Then, when he was around 6, something else happened. One evening, he casually said to my husband and me, "Remember when you lost me on the mountain during the snowstorm?" We looked at each other. What? He insisted that we had lost him on a mountain while snow was coming down because we had been running after his younger brother. That never happened. Not once. We had never even been in a situation that remotely matched what he described. No mountain, no snowstorm, no moment where we lost him. Nothing. But he insisted he remembered it clearly. Even years later, he would still say it felt like a real memory. He's 16 now. If I ask him about the story he told me when he was 3, the rocks, the rescue workers, the lightning in his chest, the hospital room, he says he doesn't remember any of it. He doesn't even remember telling me. And maybe there's a perfectly ordinary explanation for all of it. Maybe there isn't. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that I was there. I heard the words come out of my 3-year-old son's mouth. I watched him demonstrate the shock to his chest. I watched his face light up when he told me that after everything that happened, he got to become my son. And after all these years, there's still one sentence from that day that stays with me more than anything else. Of all the mums I've ever had, you're my favorite. You know, I believe you. I really do. I've had enough strange things happen in my own life that I don't automatically dismiss someone when they tell me they experienced something they can't explain. Over the years, I've seen shadowy figures, watched objects move when nobody was near them, and heard voices when I knew for a fact there wasn't another person around. One experience still stands out to me. This happened maybe 13 or 15 years ago. I had one of those little amber salt lamps sitting on a dresser in our bedroom. It gave off just enough light that I could clearly see everything on top of the dresser. There was an envelope sitting there among some papers and other random stuff. One night, I noticed the envelope twitch. At first, the movement was so small that I thought maybe I was imagining it. It shifted a fraction of an inch, stopped, then moved again. Then it started sliding back and forth. Slowly, almost carefully. It reminded me of someone trying to work an object loose without disturbing everything around it. Then, suddenly, the envelope jerked hard toward the edge of the dresser. It came right off, dragging some of the other things with it, and several items crashed onto the floor. I just sat there staring at the mess. My wife, Claire, was still awake, so I told her exactly what I had seen. She wasn't convinced. She basically told me, "There's too much junk on that dresser. Something probably shifted." We went back and forth about it for a while. I kept telling her that I had actually watched the envelope move on its own. Later, when we went to bed, the subject came up again. She laughed and told me I was making too much out of nothing. I remember lying there thinking, I know what I saw. I know I'm not imagining this. I had already put everything back on the dresser by then. I didn't arrange it in any special way. I just picked everything up and put it back. Then, almost immediately after Claire told me again that it was nothing, the envelope started moving. Right in front of both of us. It began exactly the same way. Tiny movements, back and forth, a little farther each time. It honestly looked like an invisible hand was nudging it loose. And then came that same sudden pull. The envelope shot off the dresser and knocked several things onto the floor again. My wife went completely quiet. I wasn't frightened. Strangely enough, I felt almost relieved. I leaned toward her and said, "See? That one was for you." Then, under my breath, I actually whispered toward the room, "Thank you. At least now she knows I'm not losing my mind." Whatever was happening in that house never felt threatening to me. I always had the feeling that whatever was there simply wanted to make itself known. That night especially, it almost felt playful, like it had heard our entire conversation and decided to settle the argument itself. A lot of other strange things happened in the years after that, but the envelope incident never happened again. And believe me, my dresser is probably even more cluttered now than it was back then. That's what always gets me. It happened twice. The second time happened only after my wife challenged what I had seen. And it happened almost perfectly on cue. So when you describe what happened in your garage, I wouldn't immediately assume whatever happened was trying to frighten you. You mentioned that you were doing something you probably shouldn't have been doing. I don't know the full situation, and I don't know what you keep in that garage, but garages can contain plenty of things that become dangerous very quickly. Fuel, electrical equipment, tools, chemicals, heaters, batteries, all kinds of things. So maybe what happened was less of a threat and more of a warning. If you feel comfortable doing it, The next time you're in there, you could simply say out loud, "I understand. Thank you for the warning. I won't do that again." And then, actually don't do it again. I definitely wouldn't repeat whatever you were doing just to see whether something happens. There's no reason to provoke a situation you don't understand. If it really was some kind of warning, you probably don't want to discover the hard way what it was warning you about. After that, I'd leave it alone. Don't challenge it. Don't keep asking for signs. Don't turn every visit to the garage into a conversation with whatever might or might not be there. Say what you need to say once. Keep doing your normal routine and move on. Whatever happened, whether there's a strange explanation or an ordinary one you haven't found yet, take the safety warning seriously. And if anything else unusual happens, keep track of it. Sometimes one strange incident means very little, but when a pattern starts forming, that's when things get interesting. This happened about 11 years ago, and I still remember it with a kind of clarity that makes me uncomfortable. It was somewhere around 1:30 in the morning. I wasn't home alone. My wife was asleep beside me, and our 2 kids were down the hall in their bedroom. Our oldest was 9 at the time, and our youngest, Ethan, had just turned 6. I couldn't sleep. I was lying there with my eyes closed, hoping I'd eventually drift off, but I was completely awake. You know that feeling where your body is tired, but your mind just refuses to shut down? That was me. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft footsteps, coming toward our bedroom. And I actually smiled because I immediately thought it was Ethan. He was going through a phase where he'd wake up in the middle of the night, get scared, and come crawl into bed with us. So I just stayed where I was. The footsteps reached our door and stopped. Then I heard scratching. Not loud, just this faint dragging sound against the wood, almost like fingernails brushing over the door. After that came a few quiet knocks. I remember smiling again and saying, "Buddy, you don't have to knock. Just come in and sleep with us." I wish I hadn't said that. A second later, I heard the bedroom door slowly open. Then those same light footsteps crossed the room toward the bed. I still had my eyes closed. I felt the mattress shift near my feet, and for half a second I thought Ethan was climbing onto the bed. But then I realized something was wrong. Whatever had come into the room wasn't climbing into bed. It had sat down, right near my legs. The entire bed groaned, not a tiny squeak either. I mean, the wooden frame started creaking so badly that I honestly thought something underneath us was going to snap. Then my legs started sinking, slowly, down and farther down. The mattress was being crushed beneath an enormous amount of weight. I'm a pretty big guy myself, and whatever was sitting there felt heavier than I was. Much heavier. That's when the fear really hit me, because my wife was still beside me. She hadn't moved. And there were no other adults in the house. I just froze. Maybe for 30 seconds, maybe a minute. I really don't know. I'm not proud of it, but I couldn't make myself move. All I could think was, there is something sitting on this bed. And somehow I already knew I didn't want to see what it was. Eventually, I forced myself to look. Turning my head and opening my eyes felt like the hardest thing I had ever done. The room wasn't completely dark. There was enough light coming through the curtains that I could make out the furniture, the walls, the floor, and the end of the bed. There was nobody there. Nothing. But the mattress was still pushed down. My legs were still tilted toward this deep depression near the foot of the bed, as though an invisible person was sitting there. That scared me more than seeing something probably would have. I jumped out of bed and ran straight to the kids' room. Both of them were asleep, completely fine. I checked on Ethan closely because I still wanted there to be some normal explanation. Maybe somehow he had gone back to bed without me noticing. But no, he was deeply asleep. I rushed back to check on my wife. She was still sleeping too. And when I looked at the mattress again, it had returned to normal. No dent, no weight, nothing. I spent the next hour walking around the house, turning on lights and checking everything I could think of. Windows, closets, the hallway, the front door. The door was locked. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. Eventually, somehow, I went back to bed. Nothing like that ever happened again. For years, I didn't tell anyone about it. Partly because I knew how it sounded. Partly because I didn't want people laughing at me. But there was another reason too. Talking about it felt almost like acknowledging whatever had been there, like giving it a place in the world when it shouldn't have had one. I've always been skeptical about paranormal stories. Before that night, if somebody had told me this exact story, I probably would have explained it away. Sleep paralysis, a dream, an old house settling, an imagination running wild in the middle of the night. And maybe there is an explanation. I hope there is. But I know I was awake. I know what I heard. And most importantly, I know what I felt. That mattress physically sank beneath something. I watched the depression with my own eyes. Something happened in that room. Something with weight. Something that walked through our hallway, scratched at our door, came inside after I invited it in, and sat down on our bed. More than a decade has passed. And somehow, when I think about it, I'm right back in that bedroom again, wide awake, staring at an empty space on the mattress that wasn't empty at all. So this happened a few years ago, when two of my closest friends and I rented this old mountain cabin in western North Carolina for a weekend. And when I say old, I mean old. The place had been renovated, but parts of the original stone foundation were still there from sometime in the 1800s. It was beautiful, honestly. Huge wooden beams, big windows, trees everywhere. There was even a little guest cottage farther down the property, tucked at the end of this moss-covered path. It looked like the kind of place you'd see in a travel magazine. But the second I walked inside the main house, something felt wrong. I got there later than my friends, and almost immediately, I had this strong feeling of being disoriented. Not dizzy exactly, more like my brain couldn't quite settle into the space. I kept walking into rooms and forgetting what I was doing. The air felt heavy. I didn't say anything. One of my friends, I'll call her Claire, has known me since we were kids. We've always been pretty sensitive to places. Neither of us makes a huge deal about it, but every now and then we'll walk into a room and just know something feels off. Our other friend, Megan, was newer to the group and already a little nervous about staying somewhere so isolated, so I definitely wasn't about to announce, "Hey, does anyone else feel like this house hates us?" We unpacked, had a couple glasses of wine, and eventually decided to walk down to the guest cottage. And the second I stepped inside that cottage, it was like somebody opened a window in my head. I could breathe again. I looked straight at Claire and said, "Okay, what the hell is going on with that house?" She just stared at me. Then she goes, "Thank God you said it. That place is incredibly haunted." And I swear, I felt relieved. Which is ridiculous, because hearing the words "incredibly haunted" should not make anyone feel better. But at least I knew I wasn't imagining it. Megan immediately got uncomfortable, so we dropped the conversation and headed back. Later that night, we started figuring out where everyone was going to sleep. The cabin had 3 levels, basically one sleeping area on each floor. Then we went downstairs to look at the basement bedroom. I hated it instantly. The basement was finished, but the walls were all exposed stone. None of the lights seemed to work properly, even though the rest of the house had power. And it was freezing down there. Not normal basement cool. It felt like the temperature dropped the second we reached the bottom step. Claire and I looked at each other. She gave me this tiny shake of her head. Nope. I said, "You are absolutely not sleeping down here." She goes, "Yeah, I'm absolutely not." So we went back upstairs. Eventually, we decided Claire would take the bedroom on the main floor, and Megan and I would sleep upstairs. There was a door near Claire's room that opened directly toward the basement staircase, which none of us thought much about at the time. We stayed up talking until around midnight. Megan was getting more and more freaked out, and finally asked if she could sleep in my room. I laughed and told her of course. She kept saying she felt like somebody was downstairs, and I was the idiot going, "Stop, you're fine. Nobody's downstairs, go to sleep." Now, before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand something about Claire. Claire does not panic. Ever. She is probably the calmest person I know. She's soft-spoken, considerate, never dramatic. I genuinely cannot remember hearing her yell at anyone in all the years I've known her. So sometime around 3 in the morning, when Megan and I woke up to Claire screaming my name and running up the stairs, I knew something was seriously wrong. She burst into the room, flipped on the lights, climbed straight into the bed with us, and she was shaking. Then she said, "I'm so sorry. I know this is going to scare you, but I have to tell you what just happened." Apparently, she had woken up around 2:30 and couldn't fall back asleep. She was lying there for a while and finally decided she was going to turn on the lamp and read. Before she could reach for it, she heard a woman scream from the basement. Not crying, not whispering, screaming. Claire said it sounded like the woman was absolutely furious. And then she heard her yell something like, "You bastard! I'm going to kill you!" We just stared at her. Then Claire said, "That wasn't the worst part." Right after the scream, she heard footsteps. Heavy footsteps. Somebody running up the basement stairs. Fast. She could hear each step getting closer. 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 And then they stopped directly outside her door. Nothing happened after that. No knocking, no handle turning, just silence. That's when Claire lost it, ran upstairs, and came into our room. I have absolutely no explanation for why, but somehow I eventually fell back asleep. Claire and Megan did not. When I woke up the next morning, both of them were fully dressed, bags packed, shoes on, just sitting there waiting for me to wake up. They basically said, "We're leaving." Neither of them wanted breakfast. Neither wanted coffee. They didn't even want to hang around outside. They wanted off that property. After they left, I decided to message the owner. I expected him to laugh or tell me nobody had ever experienced anything strange there. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested. Then he told me something I still think about. He said, "You know, that house has never felt right to me." He owned the property with an old college friend, and apparently that friend had actually lived in the cabin for a while. The owner told me that after moving in, his friend changed. He became deeply depressed, withdrawn. Eventually, he moved out. A few months after our stay, the owner texted me again. They had decided to sell the house. And yes, Somehow, the story gets even stranger. A couple months later, the three of us spoke with a psychic. We didn't give her every detail about what Claire had heard, just enough to ask if she picked up anything connected to the cabin. She told us she sensed a woman who had died violently in the lower part of the house after some kind of confrontation with her husband. According to her, the woman had never really moved on. The psychic later told us she believed she had helped her cross over. Do I know whether that part was actually true? No. I don't know what happened in that basement 100 years ago. I don't know who Claire heard. But I do know my calmest friend woke us up at 3 in the morning absolutely terrified because she heard a woman screaming beneath the floor. And then heard someone run up the basement stairs and stop outside her bedroom door. And that was more than enough for me. So we moved into this house about 5 years ago. It sits right on the edge of a huge stretch of woods, the kind where once it gets dark, you can't really see anything past the tree line. The house itself is pretty old, somewhere around 60 years, give or take. From what we were told, an older couple lived here for most of their lives. They raised their children here, stayed after the kids moved away, and eventually both passed away after spending nearly 50 years in the house. Their granddaughter inherited the place afterward. She fixed a few things, updated some of the rooms, and eventually decided to sell it. When we bought it, there really wasn't anything strange about the place. It just felt lived in. You could tell the previous owners had kept a lot of animals over the years because the carpets were pretty worn and there were scratches around a few of the door frames. We replaced the flooring, painted the walls, cleaned everything up, and that was basically it. No creepy basement, no weird locked room, no strange feeling that someone was watching you, just a normal house. Except for this sound. Every once in a while, usually sometime in the middle of the night, I'll wake up because I can hear something moving through the house. And the best way I can describe it is drag, drag, thump. Then silence. Then again, drag, drag, thump. The first time I heard it, the sound was so faint that I thought I was imagining it. It seemed like it was coming from the far end of the house, somewhere near the mudroom. But then it started getting louder. Drag, drag, thump. And the strange thing is, it doesn't just make random noises. It moves. I can actually follow where it is by listening. It starts near the back of the house. Then it slowly crosses the kitchen. Drag, drag, thump. Then it stops for a few seconds. After that, it starts again in the family room. Drag, drag, thump. Another pause. And then, it reaches the hallway. That's when I really start listening, because our bedrooms are at the end of that hallway. And every single time, the sound gets louder as it comes closer. Drag, drag, thump. Then suddenly, nothing. It stops. Right near the bedrooms. The first few times it happened, I convinced myself it had to be one of our animals. We have cats and dogs, so hearing strange noises at night isn't exactly unusual. Maybe one of the cats had found a toy. Maybe one of the dogs was dragging a blanket around. I tried not to think about it. Then one night, it happened again. And this time, I decided I was going to catch whatever was making the noise. I stayed completely still in bed while it moved through the house. Drag, drag, thump. Closer. Drag, drag, thump. Then I heard it enter the hallway. I slowly pushed the blankets aside and slipped out of bed. I remember trying so hard not to make the floor creak. I walked toward the bedroom door and pressed my ear against it. For a moment, nothing. Then I heard it again, right outside. Drag, drag. And then, no thump. That was somehow worse. My heart started pounding because suddenly it felt like whatever had been moving had stopped directly outside the door. I stood there with my hand hovering over the doorknob. Part of me wanted to climb back into bed and pretend I hadn't heard anything, but eventually I grabbed the knob, turned it, and pulled the door open. Nothing. The hallway was completely empty. I stood there for maybe 20 or 30 seconds before I finally worked up enough courage to walk through the house. I checked the hallway first. Nothing. Then the living room. Both cats were asleep. One was curled up on the back of the couch, and the other was stretched across their little tower. The dogs were asleep too, curled together in their bed. I checked the kids' rooms. Everyone was sound asleep. Nobody had been walking around. Nobody had dropped anything. The entire house was silent, and I've never been able to explain it. We've checked underneath the house. The crawl space is clean and sealed, and there aren't any gaps big enough for an animal of any real size to get inside. The attic was sealed when we had exterior work done a couple of years ago. And besides, the sound doesn't seem like it's coming from the ceiling or underneath the floor. It sounds like it's happening right there, inside the house. Something being dragged across the floor. Something heavy enough to make that dull thump every few seconds. And whatever makes it sounds way too big to be a mouse. Sometimes it sounds too heavy to even be one of our dogs. I don't investigate anymore. I've learned that I'd rather not know. It doesn't happen very often. Sometimes months will go by without hearing anything. But every now and then, I'll wake up in the darkness. And there it is. Very faint at first, coming from the other side of the house. Drag, drag, thump. And I just lie there, completely still, listening as it slowly makes its way toward the hallway. Closer and closer, until it reaches the bedrooms and stops. This happened when I was about 16. At the time, my family was living in this old 2-story house that always seemed to creak and settle, even when there wasn't any wind. My bedroom was at the far end of the upstairs hallway. There was nothing particularly strange about it really, except that it was always freezing. I mean, noticeably colder than the rest of the house. You could walk out of my room and immediately feel the temperature change. I was also going through a pretty miserable period of my life back then. I wasn't sleeping well, I was anxious all the time, and looking back, I think that probably played some part in what happened. At least, that's what I've tried to tell myself. It started with dreams. Nothing dramatic at first, just unsettling dreams where I had this feeling that someone was watching me. Then, night after night, the dreams became clearer. There was something in my bedroom. In the beginning, it would be standing in the corner near the door. I could never really see its face. It was more like a human-shaped patch of darkness, darker than everything around it. And every night, it seemed to move a little closer. I'd wake up suddenly, heart pounding, completely convinced that something was still there. Most of the time, I couldn't see anything. Just shadows. But that feeling wouldn't go away. Eventually, I started noticing it during the daytime too. There was this tall wooden wardrobe across from my bed, and for some reason, the top of it became the place I hated looking at most. I'd be sitting there doing homework or listening to music, and suddenly I'd get this horrible sensation that something was crouched up there, staring down at me. A couple of times, I thought I saw 2 dim red points in the darkness. Another time, I could have sworn I saw the outline of a thin, almost skeletal face. Of course, every time I looked properly, there was nothing there. That's when the dreams changed again. The thing wasn't staying in the corner anymore. Now it was standing beside my bed, then at the foot of it. Then one night, in the dream, it sat down beside my legs. I woke up immediately, and the mattress beside me was pressed down. Not slightly. It looked exactly like someone had been sitting there. I didn't sleep again that night. After that, things became physical. At first, I'd wake up because it felt like fingertips were brushing slowly along my leg. Then came little pinches. I'd wake up with bruises I couldn't explain. I was exhausted all the time. I dreaded going to sleep. I started trying anything I could find that might make whatever this was go away. I hung little charms around the room. I made sachets filled with herbs. I whispered protective prayers even though I didn't really believe in them. I put salt near the windows. At one point, I even made this ridiculous little jar filled with things I'd read were supposed to offer protection. Nothing worked. Sometimes, during those half-awake moments, I would actually hear laughter. Low, dry laughter. Like whatever was there thought my attempts were funny. One morning, I woke up and found that little protection jar shattered on the floor. It hadn't fallen from a shelf. I'd left it beside my bed. That was the moment I started getting genuinely scared. But the worst night came a few weeks later. I remember lying there, completely exhausted, fighting sleep because by then I knew what was waiting for me when I closed my eyes. Eventually, though, I drifted off. Almost immediately, I felt it. This time, the presence wasn't across the room. It was right beside my head. I couldn't move. I could feel something leaning over me. Then there was this sudden burning pain across my inner thigh. It felt like claws dragging across my skin. I woke up screaming, and for just a second, I saw it. I don't mean in a dream. I mean I opened my eyes and saw something beside my bed. It had these deep red eyes and a mouth stretched far too wide, with teeth showing through this awful skeletal grin. Its body seemed wrapped in moving shadow, and one long hand was still reaching toward me. I completely lost it. I wasn't thinking about religion. I wasn't trying to remember some ritual I'd read online. I just screamed. I said something like, "By the light, by Jesus Christ, by every holy angel and every good thing in heaven, get away from me. Leave." And something happened. For the first time, it reacted. It jerked backward. I heard this sharp, furious hiss, and the pressure in the room suddenly changed. Then everything went quiet. Completely quiet. And I remember feeling this strange warmth settle around me. The best way I can describe it is that it felt like being surrounded by light, even though the room itself was still dark. I fell asleep almost immediately, and for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The next morning, I woke up feeling rested, actually rested. I remember lying there thinking, okay, that's it. It was a nightmare. A horrible nightmare, but still just a nightmare. And honestly, I was ready to accept that explanation. I've never been especially religious. I wasn't particularly spiritual back then either. Everything I'd tried had been out of desperation more than belief. So I told myself my brain had finally reached some breaking point and created the whole thing. Then I pulled back the blanket. There were 3 long scratches across my inner thigh. Deep ones. The skin had already started scabbing, and there was dried blood around them. I just sat there staring at them. Those marks took weeks to heal. For a long time afterward, you could still see faint scars where they'd been. That day, I started researching again. I didn't care where the ideas came from anymore. I combined prayers from different traditions, burned herbs, opened every window, cleaned the room from top to bottom, said protective words out loud. and basically threw every spiritual practice I could find at the problem. It probably would have looked completely absurd to anyone watching, but after that, the nightmares stopped. The touching stopped. The bruises stopped. I never woke up to something sitting on my mattress again. Whatever had been tormenting me was finished. Mostly. Because here's the part I still don't know what to do with. It never completely felt gone. For the rest of the time we lived in that house, every once in a while I'd walk into my bedroom and feel it again. That same cold, sick feeling. That sensation of being watched. And without even meaning to, my eyes would drift toward the top of the wardrobe. I never saw the creature clearly again, but sometimes, especially at night, the shadows up there seemed just a little too dark. Like something was still sitting there. Quiet now. Waiting. And the strangest part is that the feeling disappeared the day we moved out of that house. I haven't felt it since. I've seen what I can only describe as solid black shadow figures 3 different times. It could have been 3 separate figures, or maybe the same one coming back. I honestly couldn't tell you. What I can tell you is that they move incredibly fast. The first time, I noticed this tall, completely dark shape out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but when I turned and looked directly at it, it stayed there for a few seconds. Maybe 3 or 4 seconds. That doesn't sound like much, but when you're staring at something you can't explain, 3 seconds feels like forever. Something I've noticed is that these figures seem easier to see through your peripheral vision. The second you look straight at them, they react. It's almost as though they know they've been noticed. After that first encounter, I actually started speaking out loud. I remember saying something like, "Can I help you? You don't have to hide. It's all right." I know that probably sounds strange, but I've always felt that if something is in my home and it isn't frightening me, there's no harm in acknowledging it. Not long afterward, I was in the bedroom with my cat when the dark figure appeared again in the hallway. There's a pale doorframe outside the bedroom, so I could see the shape very clearly because it completely blocked out the light-colored doorway behind it. And my cat saw it too. His neck stretched so far forward he looked ridiculous, like a little furry giraffe staring into the hallway. That was probably the most intense encounter because I wasn't the only one reacting to whatever was there. Even then, I tried talking to it. To be fair, I talk out loud around the house quite a lot anyway. I talk to the cat, I talk to myself, and sometimes I talk to whoever else might be passing through. The third time happened near the foot of my bed, close to the window. It disappeared so quickly that I almost convinced myself I hadn't seen anything at all. Then I looked at the cat. There was that giraffe neck again. That settled it for me. But the shadow figures haven't been the only strange things I've seen here. Once I saw the silhouette of a man who somehow felt connected to the old mining history of the area. Later, after digging through local records, I discovered that an old mine supervisor had lived nearby many years ago. I've also seen pale figures, wispy white shapes, dark forms, little flashes of light, and things I can only describe as orbs. Some appeared on camera, but others I saw perfectly clearly with my own eyes. One of the strangest experiences happened fairly recently. I saw an elderly gentleman beside my bed. He wasn't completely solid. He was almost translucent, but I could still make out details. He had wavy white hair and what looked like a thick, knitted jumper. He seemed to lower himself beside the bed, almost as though he was sitting down after a long day and getting ready to take his boots or socks off. Then, he simply vanished. That one never frightened me. It felt completely different. more like I'd accidentally watched a tiny piece of somebody's life replay itself. An echo rather than a visitor. The kitchen is another story altogether. Something always seems to be passing through there. And strangely enough, after I started researching the history of the land, that began to make a little more sense. The most dramatic activity happened after new neighbors moved into the property above mine. There used to be a beautiful green garden beside the house. It had ivy, old plants, uneven ground, all sorts of little wild corners. Then, almost everything was ripped out. The garden was flattened, covered over, fenced in, and turned into something much more modern and enclosed. That was when things inside my house became noisy. And I mean physically noisy. One evening I was sitting peacefully watching television when something seemed to move along the sitting room wall. A picture frame suddenly swung sideways. Then several things were knocked from a small table. Before I'd even processed that, the door flew open hard enough to bang against the wall. Whatever caused it seemed to move straight through the hallway and disappear toward the spare room. I just sat there thinking, well, this is fantastic. Then I said out loud, if you're angry about that garden, I had nothing to do with it. Go upstairs and complain to them. I was half serious and half trying not to lose my nerve. Afterward, I started explaining out loud that the altered garden wasn't mine. My own little patch out back was still green and peaceful, and I told whoever might be listening that they were welcome there. I had to say it more than once, but gradually, things settled. Then that spring, bluebells appeared. Later in the year, mushrooms began growing too. Maybe it meant something. Maybe it didn't. But I noticed. That's why I don't automatically assume every dark figure is something evil. There could be all sorts of explanations. Some traditions talk about spirits connected to the land itself, things that have been associated with a place for generations and may appear in different forms. Other times, I wonder if it's simply an intelligent presence trying desperately to communicate. If there is something after death, maybe communication isn't easy. I sometimes imagine it like two radio stations sitting almost on top of each other. Most of the time, there's only static, but every now and then, the frequencies overlap and something gets through. A shape, a sound, a word, a feeling. Eventually, all these experiences made me curious about what had actually been here before the houses were built. That research opened an entirely different door. I discovered that the house sits directly over old mining tunnels. Not beside them, over them. The workings stretch beneath the house and gardens, which suddenly made the slight lean and old subsidence in the building make much more sense. Then I discovered that several miners had died in one of the seams nearby. I even found their names. Before the mining, there had also been farmland here for generations. One family worked it for a very long time. For months, before I knew any of this, one particular name kept coming into my mind. Tom. When I finally found records for the farm, I discovered that the last farmer was named Thomas. So was his son. That stopped me in my tracks. Even stranger, the old farm track appears to have run almost directly through the part of the property where my kitchen stands today. Suddenly, all those moments when I'd sensed somebody walking through the kitchen felt a little more interesting. After that, I began acknowledging the names I'd discovered. The miners, the farming family, even an older resident of the house who, judging by what I sometimes smell for no obvious reason, must have enjoyed smoking a pipe. When I feel a freezing cold patch or notice something passing through the room, I'll sometimes just say, "Hello." There have even been periods when batteries seem to drain unusually quickly. Clocks stopped. My phone dropped power faster than normal. Whenever it happened repeatedly, I'd ask out loud, politely, for whatever was around not to draw energy from my things. Strangely enough, it would often calm down. The experiences involving people I loved are different from all of those. Sometimes there isn't a figure at all. Maybe there's only the impression of a shape nearby. But the feeling is unmistakable. Everything suddenly becomes peaceful, warm, almost as though somebody has wrapped a blanket of love around the room. Those are the moments I treasure. I don't claim to understand exactly what any of this is. I just know what I've experienced. And for me, the feeling of an encounter matters. If something appears and there's no fear, no dread, no sense that you're in danger, I don't immediately assume it means harm. Sometimes I think a place simply remembers. People live somewhere, work there, walk the same paths for decades, struggle there, laugh there, lose people there, and leave pieces of their stories behind. So if strange things are happening where you live, look into the history of the land beneath your feet. Not only the history of the building. Libraries can be wonderful for that. Local historians often know stories that never made it into official records. You might discover an old road beneath your kitchen, a forgotten mine beneath your garden, or the name of someone who walked through the exact same place long before your house ever existed. And sometimes, knowing the story of a place makes the strange things inside it feel a little less strange. I've told this story a handful of times over the years, and every time I come back to it, there's one thought I can't shake. That night could have ended very differently. I had just graduated high school, and my parents threw a big bonfire at our place to celebrate. A bunch of my friends stayed over, and we spent most of the night doing the kind of ridiculous stuff you do when you're 18 and convinced you have unlimited energy. At one point, we organized this massive game of hide-and-seek tag that basically included the whole neighborhood. Now, when I say neighborhood, you have to understand where I grew up. This was a tiny town tucked into the mountains of rural West Virginia. Maybe a little over 100 people lived there. There were trees everywhere, steep hills on both sides, and a river running through the valley. At night, once everybody's porch lights went out, the place became unbelievably dark. There was another little cluster of houses outside town that everyone called Little Italy. Getting there meant following a narrow road for about 20 minutes through the trees. During the day, it was peaceful. At night, it felt completely different. After the game ended, my friend Mason and I decided to walk out there. Neither of us was tired yet, and we figured we'd just wander around, talk about graduation, college, jobs, girls, whatever else seemed important when you just finished high school. We each grabbed a flashlight and headed out. The road was almost completely black. Dense woods were on our left, and the river was down to our right. There weren't many places to go if something came after you. You either ran back toward town, climbed into the woods, or went toward the river, which would have been an absolutely terrible idea at night. Still, we weren't scared. Not yet. When we finally reached Little Italy, there was one lonely streetlight near the road. It barely illuminated anything beyond a small circle underneath it. A few houses sat nearby, including one that had burned badly about a week earlier. The place was basically a black shell at that point. Mason and I stood under the streetlight for a minute and decided we should probably head home. Then we heard it. A growl. Not a dog growling. Not exactly. It sounded deeper than that. Almost like someone trying to imitate an animal, except there was something strangely human underneath it. We both stopped talking. I remember looking at Mason and asking, "Did you hear that?" He nodded. We stood there listening. Nothing. So we tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was some animal in the woods. A raccoon, a sick dog, something. Then it happened again. Louder. And much closer. That was when the joking stopped. we suddenly became very aware that we were standing directly underneath the only light around, basically advertising exactly where we were. So instead of immediately heading home, we slowly moved away from the streetlight in the opposite direction and crouched behind some thick bushes near the hillside, which, looking back, was probably not the brilliant survival strategy we thought it was. We turned off our flashlights and stayed completely still. I could hear Mason breathing beside me. Neither of us said anything. And one thought kept running through my mind. Nobody knows we're here. There was practically no cell service in that area back then. If something happened, we weren't calling anyone. Then something moved near the streetlight. At first, I could only see a shadow. And then a man stepped into the light. Not an animal. A man. He was big, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and messy clothes. I had lived around that town my entire life and I had never seen him before. He stood underneath the light making that same horrible, snarling sound. For a few seconds he just stayed there. Then he stopped, looked around, and said very clearly, "Where the hell did you two go?" I swear my entire body went cold, because up until that moment, part of me still believed we had accidentally wandered near some strange animal. But this guy had seen us. He had been watching us. And now he was looking for us. Mason and I didn't move. Eventually, the man stepped out of the light and disappeared into the darkness. That somehow made everything worse. At least when he was standing underneath the streetlight, we knew where he was. Now, we had no idea. We waited there for what felt like forever. The woods were completely silent. Finally, we decided we couldn't stay behind those bushes all night. We started slowly working our way along the hillside, trying to reach the road that led back home without stepping into the open. We had almost made it. Then we heard footsteps. Running footsteps. Coming toward us. That was it. We ran. No plan, no whispering, no trying to stay hidden. We just took off as hard as we possibly could. I remember hearing Mason's shoes hitting the pavement beside me and the sound of my own breathing becoming painful, but neither of us slowed down. We didn't look behind us. Not once. That 20-minute walk probably became the fastest run either of us had ever made. Even when we reached the first houses in town, we kept going. Even when I knew we were probably safe, I still couldn't make myself stop. Eventually, we made it back to my house, where everyone else was still hanging around completely unaware that anything had happened. Mason and I didn't tell them. For some reason, we barely even talked about it with each other afterward. We just quietly agreed that we were never walking out there at night again. It wasn't until later that we learned what had actually been happening. The burned house we had passed had supposedly caught fire because of a gas problem, and afterward the gas supply hadn't been properly shut off. The man we saw was someone with a serious drug problem who was arrested sometime later. Apparently, he and a few other people had been hanging around the burned property that night, inhaling gas fumes to get high. So that strange growling sound we heard in the darkness? It wasn't some wild animal. It was him. And somehow, knowing that made the whole thing even worse. Because an animal might attack you out of instinct. That man had seen two teenagers standing alone in the middle of nowhere, watched us move away from the light, and then came looking for us. I still think about that sometimes. I've walked that road plenty of times since then, but never late at night, and I never will. I watched my husband die in front of me, twice in less than a week. And I don't mean that figuratively. The first time happened on a Saturday evening, right in our living room. There was no warning, no long moment where he grabbed his chest and told me something was wrong. 1 second he was there with me, alive and breathing, and the next, He was gone. I called 911. It rang and rang and rang. By the third ring, I had already thrown open the front door and started screaming for help. By the time someone finally answered, I was frantic. I shouted that my husband wasn't breathing, gave them our address, and somehow the call disconnected. I remember thinking, no, this cannot be happening. Then one of my neighbors came running in. She looked at him, looked at me, and said, "We have to start CPR." I was frozen. I knew CPR. I had training. But when the person lying there is the person you love most in the world, your brain doesn't behave the way you think it will. My neighbor snapped me back into action. We pulled him onto the floor, shoved furniture out of the way, and started. She did compressions while I gave breaths. Then I noticed she wasn't pushing hard enough. I yelled, "Switch!" I positioned my hands where they needed to be and started compressions. On the second push, I felt his ribs break. It's awful to hear, but I knew that could happen during proper CPR. I also knew I couldn't stop, so I kept pushing. Other neighbors started arriving. People took turns. Eventually, the fire department and paramedics got there. He had no heartbeat. Nothing. I stood there listening while they shocked him again and again. 3 times. And then, somehow, unbelievably, they got a rhythm back. A neighbor drove me to the hospital because I was in no condition to drive myself. When we arrived, they wouldn't let me into the emergency department. This was during the tail end of COVID restrictions, and the hospital still had strict rules about visitors. I understood there were protocols, but all I could think was that my husband might be dying less than 100 feet away from me, and I wasn't allowed to be beside him. I felt completely helpless. My neighbor finally made enough noise that a supervisor came down to deal with the situation. She understood how serious it was and let me in. Then I sat alone in a small waiting room for more than an hour. Nobody could tell me whether my husband was alive or dead. Eventually, I got the news. He had survived. A few days later, things were finally beginning to look hopeful. By Wednesday, he had been moved out of intensive care and into a regular hospital room. We were even talking about him possibly coming home soon. I hadn't eaten properly in days, so I left the hospital for a little while to get some lunch. On the way, I stopped at a furniture store. His ribs were broken from CPR, and I wanted him to have the most comfortable chair possible when he came home. So I bought this big, soft recliner and asked them to deliver it. While I was there, the hospital called. They said he missed me. I told them I was heading home briefly to meet the delivery and that I would be right back. The furniture store was wonderful. They arranged for someone to bring the chair over almost immediately. But just as the delivery man was leaving my house, the hospital called again. This time they said, "You need to come back." My husband had become extremely agitated. Earlier in his treatment, he had been sedated while doctors placed a temporary pacemaker. Apparently, he was having a severe reaction as some of those medications worked their way out of his system. By the time I reached his room, he wasn't himself at all. He was frightened, furious, completely unable to control what he was feeling. At one point, several staff members had to hold him down just to keep him safe. They gave him more medication to calm him. And then everything went wrong. His heart stopped again. A code blue was called. Suddenly the room filled with doctors and nurses. I was pushed into the corner while everyone worked around me. Then somebody noticed I was still standing there, watching all of it, and hurried me into the hallway. And once again, I was alone. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt endless. Eventually, they rushed him back toward the ICU. I remember seeing a doctor and nurse working over his chest, ready to begin compressions again if they had to. I waited with a hospital chaplain, until they finally told me he was stable enough for me to see him. The next evening, I sat beside him in intensive care, holding his hand and praying that he would live. Across the hall was another patient behind glass walls. That patient suddenly coded. Doctors rushed in. They tried everything. But that person didn't survive. And I watched it happen. Sitting there beside my husband, seeing another family lose someone in almost exactly the way I had nearly lost him, made something very clear to me. I had come incredibly close to becoming a widow. Twice. He spent about 2.5 weeks in the hospital, followed by more time in cardiac rehabilitation. His cardiologist still calls him a golden unicorn. Apparently, with the kind of cardiac event he experienced, survival rates are extremely low, especially when it happens outside a hospital. My husband survived it at home, and then survived another cardiac arrest only a few days later. Even more remarkably, he came through without the severe neurological or physical damage the doctors feared he might have. Now we're approaching 5 years since that week. 5 years of what I call our extra time. Birthdays we might not have had. Dinners together. Ordinary mornings. Arguments about silly things. Laughing in the kitchen. Sitting beside each other doing absolutely nothing. All of it feels different now. Because once you have watched the love of your life disappear right in front of you, you understand how thin the line can be between an ordinary day and the day that changes everything. I watched my husband die twice in 4 days, and somehow, both times, he came back to me. So every year when that anniversary comes around, I don't really think about how many years have passed. I think about how many years we were given. I want to tell you this gently, because even now, after all these years, some of it still sits heavy in my chest. This started back in late 2014, after my brothers, my sister, my mom and I left a really difficult situation with my father. We were already carrying a lot, more than kids should have to carry. For a while, we stayed in a shelter, and then, near the beginning of December, we finally moved into a house of our own. That first night, it was just me and my brothers there. We brought boxes upstairs and stacked them in one of the bedrooms, waiting for the furniture to arrive before unpacking. I remember checking the stack carefully. I made sure it looked steady. Later, we went down to look at the basement. It was the first house we'd ever lived in that had one, so of course, we were curious. Near the furnace, melted into the concrete, there was this dark red symbol. It looked like a 6-pointed star inside a circle, almost like wax that had hardened into the floor. At the time, I didn't know what it was. Years later, I learned it looked like a seal of Solomon. That night, we made a bed out of blankets in the living room and watched movies until we fell asleep. But I kept waking up to the sound of someone running up the basement stairs. Fast, heavy footsteps. Then they would stop right at the basement door. I told myself it was just the house settling. Then I heard loud crashes upstairs, coming from the room where we had stacked the boxes. It sounded like something heavy being thrown. In the morning, the boxes weren't stacked anymore. They were scattered everywhere, some tipped over, some pushed into different corners of the room. I didn't tell anyone. I think I wanted so badly for the house to feel safe that I just swallowed it. After that, I started waking up in the middle of the night because of this freezing touch on my back. I sleep on my stomach, and I would feel cold fingers drag slowly down my spine. Not a draft, not a blanket. Fingers. The cold would stay on my skin even after I sat up. It happened more than once. The third time, I left my room and asked one of my siblings to sleep beside me. I noticed it never happened when someone else was there. In 2015, I was in high school and dating my first girlfriend. She kept telling me she heard growling in my room when I left her alone. At first, I didn't believe her. Then one day, we were sitting quietly, and I heard it too. It sounded like a dog growling beside my bed. Low, rough, angry. I looked at her, and her face said everything. She wasn't relieved to be believed. She was terrified. After that came the shadows. I would wake up in the morning and see what looked like a tall man leaving my bedroom. Not walking exactly, more like the darkness in the room was being pulled out through the doorway. Around that time, my mom spoke with a neighbor who casually mentioned that strange things happened in the area. She said people had seen something like a dark cloud moving through houses. By 2016, the rest of my family started seeing things too. One day, my mom and sister were baking in the kitchen when my sister suddenly froze. Her eyes followed something across the room. When I looked, I saw the perfect outline of a person on the bathroom door across the hall, even though the door was lit up. Then things became physical. Objects started flying across rooms. One night, while my mom was putting the younger kids to bed, a toy car flew from the closet shelf and shot across the room. It didn't fall. It launched. Another time, my aunt was doing laundry in the basement when a framed photo flew off the windowsill toward her and shattered. She was shaken badly. She kept saying there was no way it could have moved like that on its own. That same year, a classmate came to our door and said he used to live in the house. My mom let him come in and look around. He smiled and asked if anything creepy had happened to us. When I asked what he meant, he just said, "Never mind," and left. By 2017, things had taken a darker turn. One morning in March, I was sitting in the basement listening to music before school. It was a little after 7. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow on the concrete wall. When I looked directly at it, it looked like a person hanging by the neck. I tried to explain it away. There was a punching bag nearby, but the shape didn't match. There was no reason for it to look like a human body. Later that morning, my mom told me my younger cousin had died. He had taken his own life. The time of death was around 7. That moment still haunts me in a way I don't really have language for. By 2018, the shadows changed. They stopped simply standing in doorways. They started appearing in places that didn't make sense. A head would peek down from the upper corner of a doorway. A figure would seem to lean out from behind furniture that was flush against the wall. Shapes would appear where no body could possibly fit. That was also when the nightmares and sleep paralysis started getting worse for all of us. My brother Connor would feel hands grabbing at him from beneath the bed, like something was trying to pull him down through the mattress. My brother Leo would see a black figure with horns and goat-like legs blocking the light in his room. Leo became fixated on it for a while. He kept drawing the same figure over and over. Eventually, I destroyed the drawings, and he stopped. Around then, I started waking up to the sound of someone breathing in my room. A slow exhale. Close enough that I would hold my own breath just to make sure it wasn't me. That still happens sometimes. In 2019, my mom and I both began having dreams that felt like warnings. She came to me crying once because she believed her brother was going to die. A few months later, he was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer, and he passed not long after. I had my own dreams too, but some of them are hard to talk about because they sound impossible, even to me. In early 2020, we had the house blessed by a pastor. For a while, things seemed to calm down. Then, for reasons I still regret, I started reading about demonology. I think after years of fear, I had become numb in a strange way. I read things I wish I hadn't. Around that time, I began hearing a loud clicking sound in the house, almost like someone clicking their tongue. It only happened when I was alone, or when no one else was close enough to hear it. In 2021, something happened while I was on the phone with a friend during a really emotional moment. I heard a hissing sound building beside my ear. Then my ear burned. I ran to the mirror and it was red, hot, and inflamed. That was when it felt like whatever was in the house had crossed another line. Later, I became friends with an Ojibwe medicine woman and invited her over. She wasn't there long before she told me she felt another presence in the home. She described it as angry, jealous, cruel, and full of hatred. The strange part was that she led me to the exact places in the house where we always felt watched. She gave me cedar to hang above my door and smudged the house. It helped for a while. I asked her if we had somehow brought this on ourselves, and she told me no. She said whatever was there had been there for a long time, probably long before us. In 2022, I had a friend over. We were drinking, and I went to the kitchen to get soda. That's when I saw the outline of a man standing in the kitchen curtains. He was facing into the room. I could see the shape of his legs and feet through the fabric. I told my friend, half joking because I didn't know what else to do, "The ghost is downstairs if you want to see it." He laughed, but he went to look. When he came back, his face had gone pale. He said a head-shaped shadow leaned out from behind the wall and looked straight at him. After that, the figure appeared behind those curtains often. Sometimes the curtain would still hold the shape of a body after the figure was gone, like fabric remembering something it shouldn't. That year, I also had a terrible feeling about someone I cared about, a woman I really liked. The last time I saw her, I had this sudden, sick certainty that she was going to die. 3 weeks later, she overdosed. I still think about whether I could have done something. That question is a room I keep walking back into, even when I know there's no answer waiting there. Around the same time, Connor told me he'd been dreaming about a black smoke with an angry human face. He said it attacked him in dreams, especially when he tried to pray. He said it became furious whenever he got close to saying, "Amen." Then I started having the same dreams. They didn't feel like normal dreams. They felt like waking up inside an exact copy of the house. If something had been moved after I went to bed, I would see it that way in the dream before discovering it the next morning. In 2023, I had one of the worst dreams of my life. I dreamed Leo suffered a devastating head injury. I saw him crushed. I woke up crying because I was so grateful it wasn't real. Then, on August 1st, around 8 in the morning, Leo had an accident. A heavy weight crushed his skull. He had multiple fractures and was gone for a minute before they brought him back. He survived, thank God. But he said that while he was gone, Christ came to him and called him toward God. That became the beginning of his faith. Even though he's okay now, I still have flashbacks. I still feel dread hit me out of nowhere. What hurts most is that I dreamed it before it happened, and I couldn't stop it. Connor was deeply traumatized too. After that, he started crying and screaming in his sleep. Sometimes I stay awake just so I can wake him if a nightmare grabs hold of him. Then came 2024. In April, I got a serious infection and ended up hospitalized for a week. While I was there, I had a heart attack and nearly died. The next night, the man in the bed beside me was praying out loud, and I stayed awake listening. At some point, I fell asleep. By morning, he had passed away. After they wheeled his bed away, I woke up later that night, unable to move. Sleep paralysis again. To my right, where his bed had been, I saw the curtain pulled over the outline of a man. He looked like he was wearing a long coat and a hat. The shape of his face was turned toward me. I was so afraid I couldn't even think. I just froze there until everything went black. When I woke up, I saw that Connor had messaged me during the night, asking me to pray because he had a terrible feeling about me. I didn't tell him what happened until after I was discharged. I know how all of this sounds. I know some people will hear it and look for simple explanations, and honestly, I've tried to do that too. I've spent years trying to call things coincidence, stress, trauma, sleep paralysis, grief, old house noises, anything that might make it easier to carry. But after 10 years, it doesn't feel like one strange event. It feels like a pattern, and whether anyone believes me or not, I lived it. My family lived it. The fear was real. The grief was real. The things we saw, heard, dreamed, and felt changed us. That house never felt empty. Not really. It always felt like something was listening. I went camping with two close friends of mine, who I'll call Jonah and Andrew. We headed up to Wall Lake in the Uintas. It's not a long hike from the parking lot, maybe a mile and a half or so, but far enough that once you're out there, you really feel tucked away from everything. When we got to the lake, we walked around a bit and ended up choosing a quieter spot on the east side. It felt more private than the other areas, and at the time, that sounded perfect. The way we set up camp matters. I had my tent near a rocky drop-off, kind of right on the edge. Jonah hung his hammock maybe 20 or 30 yards east of me, and Andrew set up his tent farther off, probably 80 or 90 yards southeast. The day itself was honestly great. We fished, wandered around, joked with each other, and just enjoyed being out there. Nothing felt strange. Nothing felt wrong. By the time night came, we were worn out. We sat around the fire for a while, telling stories and talking the way you do when you're tired and the woods are quiet around you. Around 11 p.m., we finally decided to call it a night. I fell asleep pretty fast. Then, at about 1:40 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. At first, I thought I was still half dreaming because I could hear what sounded like a man talking nearby. Not far away either. It sounded like it was maybe 30 feet from my tent. But the longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't real speech. It had the rhythm of talking, but there were no actual words, just murmuring, mumbling, nonsense sounds. And that's when I really woke up, because I knew there shouldn't have been anyone else out there. Earlier that evening, we had seen the only other group at the lake pack up and leave. As far as we knew, it was just the three of us. So I lay there completely still, barely breathing, waiting for something else to happen. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no branches moving, no voices, just silence. Eventually, I tried to convince myself it had been some weird dream bleeding into waking up. I was tired. I was in the woods. Maybe my brain was just filling in the blanks. I managed to fall asleep again. Then, about an hour later, I woke up to this deep, guttural call right beside my head. I mean, right beside me. It sounded like it was barely 2 feet from the wall of my tent. It made the sound in a pattern. 5 calls in a row. Then it stopped. A couple seconds later, I heard the same call from the direction of Andrew's tent. Then, only a few seconds after that, it came from Jonah's hammock. That was when fear really took over. Whatever this was, it was moving between us impossibly fast. I stayed frozen in my sleeping bag, staring into the dark inside my tent, trying to make myself think clearly. But I couldn't. My mind just locked up. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy footsteps. They were coming toward my tent. I could hear rocks shifting under its weight, twigs snapping, dirt scraping. It walked right up to me and stopped. Right outside. And it just stood there. I remember lying there with tears in my eyes, too scared to move, too scared to make a sound. I kept thinking that if I stayed completely still, maybe it would leave me alone. But it didn't leave. From around 2:30 in the morning until a little after 5, it kept moving around our campsite. And it wasn't just walking, it was making those awful calls. It was screeching. It was mumbling like a person trying to speak through a mouth that didn't know how. At one point, it sounded like it hit or slapped the trees. Every so often, it let out this sharp, piercing cry that felt like it went straight through my chest. I spent the whole time praying the sun would come up. I was also sending satellite messages to my girlfriend throughout the night. Every time I used my phone, I hid under my sleeping bag so the light wouldn't show through the tent. When morning finally came, I still didn't move right away. It took me until about 7:30 to gather enough courage to unzip my tent and step outside. I went to Jonah first and asked him if I had lost my mind. Before I could even explain everything, he looked shaken and said, "It was standing over my hammock." He told me he couldn't see out clearly because he had pulled himself deep into his sleeping bag, but he was sure something had walked right up to him. He said he could feel it there, staring down at him. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He told me it said his name. Not clearly the whole time, mostly mumbling. But once, he said, it whispered his name clearly enough that he knew what he heard. He also told me that around 3:30 in the morning, he had suddenly turned on his flashlight and scanned the area, but he didn't see anything. I remembered that moment. I remembered seeing the light flash through the trees, and right when it came on, I heard something sprint toward my tent. Andrew had a different experience. He said he had finished off the rest of his flask before bed and slept through most of it. He only woke up once because his air mattress had gone flat. He admitted he felt like he was being watched, but said he figured that was just part of sleeping in the woods. We didn't debate it. We didn't try to investigate. We packed up immediately and left. The trip was over. And honestly, I haven't slept right since. I keep having these sharp little flashbacks to that night. The footsteps, the voice, the way it moved between us, the feeling of something standing just outside my tent. I still don't know what scares me more. The fact that none of us ever saw what it looked like, or the fact that it somehow knew Jonah's name, because that means it may have been listening to us before we ever went to sleep. I keep hoping someone can explain it away. An animal, a person, some weird echo or sound carrying across the lake, anything. But part of me has accepted that maybe there's something out there in those mountains, something old and mean and waiting, and we were lucky it only wanted to scare us. So, my gran bought me this teddy from a charity shop when I was younger. I didn't think anything of it at first. It was just a teddy, right? But honestly, from the moment that thing came into the house, everything started feeling wrong. I'd leave it in my room, go downstairs for tea, or come back from school, and it wouldn't always be where I'd left it. At first, because I was a kid, I genuinely thought maybe toys could move when nobody was looking. I told my mom about it, and I remember her face changing. She tried to stay calm, but I could tell it unsettled her. Not long after that, I remember some priest coming round to the house. I think I was about 9 at the time, so I don't remember every detail because I ended up staying at my uncle's for a bit. But after that, things started going missing. I used to play games on my dad's old phone, and one day it just disappeared. I had this old Buzz Lightyear toy too, one of the older ones, and that vanished as well. He was always kept in my room, so I thought maybe my mom had sold him or thrown him out, but she swore she hadn't touched it. Then I started hearing things. Little taps on the walls, noises at night. Sometimes it sounded like stones or something were being thrown at my bedroom window. It was the sort of thing where you try to convince yourself it's nothing, but deep down, you know something feels off. When I was around 11, I got up to use the toilet really early in the morning, and I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. It was fast, just this shape slipping away before I could properly look at it. That scared me so badly that I didn't sleep in my own room for months. I stayed with my parents because I just couldn't face being in there alone. Eventually, I did go back to my room. I had bunk beds, and I slept on the top bunk, close to the ceiling. But then I started hearing footsteps above me in the loft. Sometimes it sounded like walking. Other times it sounded like running. I just lie there frozen, listening, too scared to move. Things at home got worse around that time too. My sister started going through some really difficult stuff, and there was a lot of violence and chaos in the house. I won't go into all of it, but it was a lot. And while that was happening, the activity seemed to get stronger. From around 12 to 14, I'd wake up with bruises and scratches I couldn't explain. Sometimes it felt like my hair was being pulled so hard I'd cry. It got to the point where I didn't feel safe in my own room anymore. On the last night before we moved out of that house, my mom said strange things happened in the kitchen. She was washing up, and the chairs apparently started moving. Cupboard doors opened by themselves too. I was asleep when it happened, so I didn't see it, but she told me about it afterwards. When we moved into the house we're in now, things calmed down for a little while. For about a month, it actually felt peaceful. I thought maybe it was finally over. But then I started seeing shadowy figures. I'd catch them out of the corner of my eye, standing in places they shouldn't be. Around December, I was pushed down the stairs. I've been grabbed, scratched, and I've had marks on me that looked like a man's hand. Even my light started changing colors by itself, and it was an LED one, so you had to press buttons to change it. Now it's got to the point where I can't be alone in the house without feeling terrified. A few weeks ago, I came home from tutoring and went to the bathroom. While I was in there, I heard the kitchen cupboard open, then the sound of glasses crashing or flying out. Nobody was near the kitchen. And one of the scariest things was when my 2-year-old neighbor pointed toward the top of the stairs, absolutely terrified, and said, "It's looking at me. The man is looking at me." Everyone else was downstairs. I don't really know what to do anymore. This has been happening since I was about 9 or 10, and I'm 16 now. Similar things have happened to my siblings too, and my mom has had strange experiences since she was around my age, so I don't know if it's connected to the house, the family, or something else entirely. And as for the teddy my gran bought me, my younger sister cut it up years ago during one of her angry episodes. But even after it was gone, the strange things didn't stop. That's the part I still can't understand. I used to think university ghost stories were just little things students made up to frighten first years. You know the kind. Every campus has them. The room nobody wants to sleep in. The staircase people avoid after dark. The quiet road where footsteps follow you even when you are alone. The pond where someone is supposed to lean close and whisper right beside your ear. But when I began reading about the 7 mysteries of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, I felt something different. Not because I believed every single story. Honestly, many of them have no official record, no clear source, and no version that everyone agrees on. They have survived the way campus legends usually survive, passed from student to student, changed a little each time, softened in some places, sharpened in others. And maybe that is what makes them feel so real. The first mystery is the braided girl. People say that somewhere along a quiet path on campus, a girl with long braids appears late at night. She is probably the most famous legend connected to CUHK. So famous that she almost feels bigger than the list itself. Ask around and someone will always know a version. The second mystery is the phantom shuttle bus. According to the story, a music student named Kelvin once waited very late at University Station, hoping to catch the last bus back to New Asia College. Then, a bus arrived without making a sound. The driver wore an old uniform, the kind you would expect to see in an old photograph. Inside, almost every seat was taken. Kelvin got on, tired and grateful. But after a moment, he realized something was wrong. The last bus should have left already. As the bus moved through campus, the world outside began to change. New buildings turned into unfinished construction sites. Familiar roads looked older. Passengers stepped off at stops that should not have existed anymore. When the bus finally reached New Asia, Kelvin hurried out. But before he left, the driver called after him and said, "Some people rush to leave. Some rush to come back. And you, where are you trying to go?" Kelvin ran all the way to his dorm. They say he was sick for days afterward. Then there is the story of room 109 in Sisman Hall. The rumor says that in the late 1980s, an engineering student under terrible pressure built a timed electrical device inside his basement room. Later, his roommate found him dead. After that, people say the university changed the room numbers, hoping the story would disappear. But students still whisper that if you find one pale, reddish tile in the basement corridor, you are standing where that room used to be. That one does not feel like an ordinary ghost story to me. It feels more like a warning, a sad one, about pressure, loneliness, and what can happen when knowledge becomes a weapon against the person carrying it. The fourth mystery is the soup pot at Bethlehem Hall. There was once a girl upstairs and a boy downstairs who loved each other. This was before messages could be sent in a second, and dorm rules were stricter then. So at night, she would lower food from her window to his. Sometimes oxtail soup, sometimes red bean soup. Small warm things sent down through the dark. But after the boy did well in his studies, he left her behind. The story says she died heartbroken, and since then, students have claimed that around midnight, a soup pot can still be seen hanging outside the lower window, swaying quietly as if someone has just let go of the rope. The fifth mystery is the lotus pond at Chengchi. A girl was supposed to meet her boyfriend there at midnight, but he never came. Later, her friends told her he had been with someone else. After her death, the legend says people walking near the pond late at night may hear a cold voice close to their neck. Is it midnight yet? And if you answer yes, she pulls you into the water. The sixth is the curse of the university gate. Freshmen are warned not to walk through the center of the sculpture. People say doing so can bring failed romance, failed studies, or something even worse. One student supposedly took a photo there on his first day. After that, his relationship ended, his grades fell apart, and later, after his death, classmates found the same photo with strange, curse-like writing all over the back. The seventh mystery is almost funny, at least at first. It is the two-headed monster of Lover's Path. They say if you walk there alone after midnight, you might see a strange, two-headed figure waiting in the dark. But another version says it is not a monster at all. It is just two lovers sitting very close together under dim light, their shadows blending into one strange shape. That last story changed how I understood all the others. Maybe these mysteries are not only about ghosts. Maybe they are about being young, about feelings too heavy to name, about confessions never spoken, about exams that felt like they could decide your whole life, about love that could not survive growing up, about rooms, ponds, paths, buses, and gates quietly holding all the emotions students had nowhere else to put. Universities are haunted because they are places in between. You arrive as one version of yourself, and you leave as another. And somewhere between those two people, something is always left behind. So if you ever walk through CUHK at night, past the Lotus Pond, Lover's Path, or a silent dorm corridor, maybe do not search too hard for ghosts. Just whisper, "Good night." Not to them, to the version of yourself that never made it out. I live up on the far north coast of Scotland now, where the sea has a way of sounding alive at night. Last Tuesday, just after 10:30, I decided to walk out and revisit an old wartime pillbox on the coast, not too far from the road between Thurso and Scrabster. I'd been there once before, back when I first moved to the area, but that had been during the day. This time, for whatever reason, I wanted to see it after dark. So I left town and followed the cliff path west, with the wind coming in cold off the water. After a while, I made my way down toward a stony little beach. From there, I kept walking along the shore until I reached a narrow headland jutting out toward the sea. The pillbox sits right up on top of it. To get there, I had to find this thin little trail that climbed through the grass. It wasn't much of a path, really, more like something made by sheep, weather, and people who probably shouldn't have been wandering around there in the dark. When I reached the top, I saw the structure properly. It was small, square, and squat, built of old brick and concrete, with an open entrance where a door might once have been. I took a few photos from outside first, just standing there with the sea behind me and the black shape of the pillbox in front of me. Then I stepped inside. The interior was about the size of a garden shed. The walls were painted white, though most of the paint had worn away or been stained by damp. There were narrow firing slits in the walls, just enough to let in strips of night and the sound of the wind. Along one side, there was a low concrete ledge, roughly knee-height, covered in graffiti and old scratches. At first, it felt exactly how you'd expect an abandoned coastal bunk to feel. Cold, quiet, forgotten. But then I noticed something strange. Whenever I stood near the entrance or turned my back directly toward it, I started to feel deeply uneasy. Not frightened in a dramatic way, not panicked, just watched, pressed on, as though something about that doorway had its own weight. If I moved to the far side of the room, the feeling faded. I could breathe easier there. I could look around, take photos, and convince myself I was being silly. But the moment I drifted back toward the entrance, that same discomfort returned. It felt as if the air around the doorway had gone sour. I know how that sounds, I really do. It sounds like nerves, darkness, imagination, all of it gathering together and making a little theater in the mind. But standing there, in that cramped white room with the sea roaring outside, it didn't feel imaginary. It felt specific. It felt located, like the wrongness belonged to that one spot. After taking a few more pictures, I decided I'd had enough. I stepped out of the pillbox and started heading back toward town. The strange thing is, this wasn't the first time I'd felt something like that in an old military place. Years ago, I explored a tunnel beneath a fort in England, and I had that same kind of heavy, uncomfortable feeling there too. I later found out that place had a reputation for being haunted. Fort Paul in northeast England, if you want to look it up. When I got home, I started researching the pillbox I'd just visited. That's when I found out it's known locally as Scrabster Castle. Not because the pillbox itself is a castle, obviously, but because it was built over the ruins of one. Supposedly, the castle dated back centuries, possibly to the medieval period. And according to one old story, a bishop was once horribly tortured there. His tongue was cut out, and his eyes were taken. Now, I couldn't find any proper record of the pillbox being haunted. No ghost stories. No reports from other people saying they'd felt anything strange inside it. Nothing like that. So maybe it was just me. Maybe it was the dark, the isolation, the wind, and the knowledge that I was standing in a place layered with old violence and old stone. But I'll tell you this. There was something about that doorway. And even now, when I think about it, I don't remember the room first. I don't remember the graffiti, or the ledge, or the narrow windows. I remember that entrance. I remember standing near it. And I remember feeling very clearly that I should not turn my back on it. This happened back in October 2024, during my first year of diploma college, when I was staying in a hostel. I'm not sharing this because I want to prove anything to anyone. I'm not trying to say ghosts are definitely real, or that everyone has to believe me. Honestly, even now, I don't fully understand what happened. I've gone over it in my head so many times, and I'm still searching for an answer. For privacy, I'll change the names a little. It started one night at around 3:40 in the morning. My roommate at the time, I'll call him Arian, called me from the old washroom area of our hostel. The moment I picked up, I could tell something was wrong. His voice was shaking badly. He didn't explain anything. He just said, "Bro, come to the old washroom. Please come now." I got up immediately and went there. The corridor felt strange that night. It wasn't just quiet. Hostels are usually quiet at that hour, but this felt heavier somehow, like the whole building was holding its breath. When I reached the washroom, Arian was still inside. The first thing he asked me was, "You're outside, right?" I said, "Yes, I'm here." He stepped out slowly, and I still remember his face. He wasn't just scared. He looked completely shaken, like he had seen something his mind couldn't accept. He looked straight at me and said one word, "Run." And we ran. We ran all the way back to our room, locked the door, and played Hanuman Chalisa on the phone. Neither of us really slept after that. We just waited for morning. The next day, Arian was so disturbed that he called his family and left for home. When he came back after the break, he was wearing a protective amulet. He told me he had visited a spiritual healer. At that time, I honestly didn't take it seriously. I thought maybe he got scared. Maybe he imagined something. Maybe the old washroom just got into his head. I even laughed a little. I thought whatever happened that night was finished. But later, things changed. A few months passed, and Arian and I had a small argument. Nothing huge, just hostel room kind of tension. After that, I shifted rooms. Around that time, I became very close with another friend. I'll call him Bhavesh. I was already spending most of my time in his room, so eventually I moved in with him. For a while, everything felt normal again. No strange sounds, no bad dreams, no weird feeling. Life became ordinary. Then the second semester started. I had gone home for a festival, and before returning to the hostel, I changed my sacred thread, the paita, or janu. In my family tradition, it's something Brahmin boys wear across the body. I had eaten non-vegetarian food and hadn't changed it for a long time, so before going back, I replaced it. When I returned, I don't know what came over me, but I suddenly wanted Bhavesh and me to shift to room number 17. He didn't want to move at all. He kept saying the room was unnecessary, that we were fine where we were. But I kept convincing him, and somehow he finally agreed. Sometimes I still think about that decision. Room number 17 had a window facing an empty ground. Not too far from there was a government hospital. I don't know if that matters, but I remember it clearly. I liked keeping the window open at night because I wanted fresh air. It made the room feel less suffocating. Then one night, around 1 in the morning, I woke up. Or at least, I thought I woke up. I could see the room. I could see the wall, the fan, the beds, and Bhavesh sleeping nearby. Everything looked real. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even move my fingers. Then I saw the door of the room slowly opening, and someone came inside. It looked like a woman wearing a white sari. She walked slowly toward my bed. She came near my feet, climbed onto the bed, and sat on my chest. The pressure was unbearable. My breathing became heavy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call Bhavesh. I wanted to push her away. But my body wouldn't listen. I could only lie there and watch. Then, after what felt like forever, I suddenly snapped out of it. I moved closer to Bhavesh, terrified, and somehow forced myself to sleep. At first, I told myself it was just sleep paralysis. But then it happened again. And again. For the next 2 nights, the same thing kept happening. After that, something in me started changing. I became angry for no reason. Small things irritated me. I felt emotionally unstable, like my mind was full of noise I couldn't switch off. One day, Bhavesh and I had a minor argument. It wasn't serious, but suddenly I felt completely alone. I went to the hostel terrace and cried for hours. I would come downstairs, try to calm myself, and then go back up and cry again. I made sure nobody saw me. I didn't want anyone to know how badly I was breaking inside. And then, for the first time in my life, thoughts came into my mind that genuinely scared me. I searched about them online. I tried calling friends. Nobody picked up. Finally, around 1:30 in the morning, I called home while crying. After that, my memory becomes blurry. From what people later told me, I became completely uncontrollable. Around 20 people were trying to calm me down and hold me. Some seniors came. Some hostel staff came. Even the principal arrived. People started putting religious lockets and pendants around my neck. My family had already started traveling almost 200 kilometers to reach me. The next morning, they took me to a Muslim spiritual healer. At first, I felt normal. I was sitting there, aware of everything. Then, during the ritual, he blew prayers over me. And I still remember what happened next. It felt like something rushed through my body. Not exactly pain, not exactly fear, more like electricity moving through me. My parents later told me I wasn't acting like myself at that moment. After the ritual, I was given an amulet. And after that day, slowly, everything stopped. It has been almost a year now. I left that hostel completely and moved to another hostel near the highway. Since then, nothing like that has ever happened again. Some people from my old hostel know this story. Some believe me, some don't. And honestly, I understand both sides. If someone had told me this a few years ago, I probably wouldn't have believed them either. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was a mental breakdown. Maybe there's a scientific explanation for everything that happened. I really don't know. But I know this much. The fear was real. The pressure on my chest felt real. The crying was real. The sleepless nights were real. And whatever happened in that hostel changed me. Even now, I don't sleep beside an open window. I never went back to that old washroom alone. Maybe that's fear. Maybe it's trauma. Maybe it's just my mind trying to protect itself. But whenever I randomly wake up between 3 and 4 in the morning, room number 17 comes back to me. The silence. The fan. Bhavesh sleeping peacefully beside me. Me checking whether the door was locked. Me making sure the window was closed. And sometimes I still ask myself one question. If I had never convinced Bhavesh to move into room number 17, would any of this have happened? And the strangest part is this. Why did everything stop only after I left that hostel? I still don't know. And maybe I never will. But after almost a year, I'm still searching for an answer. I never never really meant to tell this story. For a long time, I kept trying to fold it into something ordinary, something I could explain away and leave behind. But even now, after all these years, it still comes back to me at night. This happened in late October of 2018, when I was living by myself in a little rental house outside a rural town in Oregon. It was not some ancient, crumbling place. Nothing dramatic like that. Just a plain single-story house at the end of a quiet road, with fields on both sides and the closest neighbor far enough away that their porch light looked like a star. One night, I woke up at 3:19 in the morning. I remember the time clearly because my alarm clock was facing the bed, glowing red in the dark. At first, I did not know why I was awake. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not on the porch, not outside the window, inside the house. They were coming from the hallway, slow and heavy across the wood floor. 3 steps. Then a pause. 3 more steps. Another pause. I lay there completely still, telling myself it was pipes or old boards shifting, or my tired brain still dragging pieces of a dream into the room with me. But then the footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. The door was shut. Underneath it, I could see a thin strip of yellow light from the kitchen lamp I had accidentally left on. And then something blocked that light. A shadow filled the gap. It did not sway. It did not move. It was just there. I reached for my phone without making a sound and opened the security camera app. I had a cheap little camera set up in the living room, angled toward part of the hallway. The feed loaded. The hallway was empty. I stared at the screen, breathing so quietly it hurt, because I could see nothing on the camera. But with my own eyes, I could still see the shadow under my door. Then the doorknob moved. Just once at first. A soft rattle. Then again. Then a third time. It turned slightly back and forth, careful and patient, like someone was checking whether I had locked it. I could not move. I could not even call out. After maybe 10 or 15 seconds, it stopped. The shadow vanished. The strip of kitchen light came back beneath the door, warm and ordinary, like nothing had happened at all. I stayed awake until sunrise with every light in the house on. The next morning, I checked the camera footage. At exactly 3:19 a.m., the living room recording glitched. There was no person in the hallway, no movement I could clearly point to. But the picture broke apart for several seconds, turning grainy and warped, almost like static. At the edge of the frame, for just a moment, there was a dark shape. I know what that sounds like. I told myself it was a bad camera, a compression error, dust maybe, anything else. A few weeks later, I mentioned it to an older woman who lived on a farm down the road. I barely got through the first part before she went quiet. Then she asked me, very softly, "Did it stop at your bedroom door?" I laughed because I did not know what else to do. She told me people had talked about that house before. A couple had left after only 3 months. Another renter said they heard someone walking the hallway almost every night. Always after 3. Always stopping at the bedroom door. I moved out the following spring. But the part that still bothers me happened on my last night there. I was clearing out a closet when I found an old photograph wedged behind the back of a shelf. It showed the land before the house existed. Just a wide, empty field under a pale sky. On the back, written in faded blue ink, were 6 words. "Don't let him know you're awake." I threw the photograph into the trash outside. The next morning, before I drove away for good, I checked the bin. The photograph was gone. I had one of the strangest experiences I've ever had. And honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it. I'm sharing this because I'd really like to hear serious thoughts from people who understand paranormal experiences, religion, dreams, sleep-related phenomena, out-of-body experiences, or spiritual encounters. Just to give a little context, I'm not the kind of person who spends every night watching ghost videos or looking for spooky explanations. I also work late hours pretty often, so being awake around 3 in the morning isn't unusual for me. This wasn't a situation where I saw the time, thought about the so-called witching hour, and then convinced myself something strange had happened. The experience came first. The research came afterward. I remember waking up around 3:17 a.m., but before I woke up, I was somewhere that felt like my living room. It looked familiar enough that I knew what it was supposed to be, but it didn't feel like my actual living room. It felt almost like a copied version of it, or another layer of the same place, the same room, but not quite the same reality. Everything was dark, muted, and almost drained of color. There was a figure in the room with me. I could tell it was dressed in something that looked like a dark suit, but I couldn't see its face. Where the face should have been, there was this bright glow or light around it, strong enough that the features were completely hidden. The thing that unsettled me was that it seemed aware of me. It felt like it was looking right at me the whole time. And then it started moving closer. But it didn't move normally. It was extremely slow, almost unnaturally slow, like time wasn't working properly around it. The movement had this delayed, overlapping quality. At a few points, I honestly couldn't tell if there were two figures standing there, or if I was seeing some kind of trailing image from the same figure moving through the room. As it got closer, I started feeling this humming sensation. It wasn't just something I heard. It felt physical, like a vibration moving through the space and through my body. The closer the figure came, the stronger that vibration became. When it finally sat down near me, the humming was at its strongest. It felt intense, almost like being surrounded by a frequency I couldn't escape. And then I woke up. I checked the time and saw it was around 3:17 a.m. My first feeling was relief. I was awake. I was in my real room. I was safe. Still, I felt shaken enough that I brought my dog into the bedroom with me, just to feel a little more grounded. Later, I remembered that my door camera records audio, so I went back and checked the footage from around that time. Between about 3:14 and 3:15 a.m., there were two distinct sounds captured. I'm not saying that proves anything paranormal. I'm not trying to force that conclusion. I'm only saying the sounds were there, and I don't know what caused them. Since then, I've been reading about the period between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. I've seen some religious and spiritual traditions describe that time as significant, while other explanations point to sleep cycles, vivid dreams, sleep paralysis, or the brain being in a strange in-between state. I'm not looking for someone to tell me, that was definitely a spirit, or that was definitely just a dream. I'm more interested in hearing from people who have experienced something similar, or who know about paranormal traditions, religious teachings, sleep phenomena, out-of-body states, or spiritual encounters. Has anyone else ever felt like they were in a familiar place, but it seemed like a different version of reality? And has anyone experienced a presence that seemed fully aware of them, along with a vibration or humming that grew stronger as it came closer? I've only told a handful of people about this, mostly close family, because it's still happening, and honestly, it's been weighing on us. I'm sharing it now because I don't really know what else to do with it, and I'm hoping someone out there might have some kind of insight. I spend a lot of time along the coast here in Maine. I know this area well. I know the tide patterns, the usual sounds at night, the wildlife, the way the water moves when the weather changes. My girlfriend, Lena, and I take late walks pretty often, usually somewhere between 10 at night and midnight, along a quiet beach not far from where we live. At that hour, it's empty. Not quiet in the peaceful tourist brochure sense. Empty. No people, no headlights, no voices. Nothing but the surf, the wind, and the sky. This started a few weeks ago. We were doing our usual walk, about 2.5 miles along the shore, when I noticed something standing in the surf. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was a tall, black silhouette, very slender, with what looked like arms hanging at its sides. It was standing in ankle-deep water, perfectly still. I pointed it out to Lena, and she immediately wanted to turn back. I don't blame her. Something about it felt wrong from the first second. I'm usually the curious one. I've always been interested in strange sightings, UFOs, unexplained things, so my first instinct wasn't exactly fear. It was this intense need to understand what I was looking at. But the closer I got, the stranger it felt. I'm about 6'2", and whatever this was looked taller than me. Maybe 6'6", maybe close to 7 feet. There was no artificial light out there, just moonlight and stars, but I could still make out the shape clearly enough. It looked humanoid. Not like a person in a wetsuit, not like driftwood, not like a post or a buoy. It looked like something standing there and watching us, and I mean that in the most literal way. I could feel it watching us. I walked closer, maybe within 100 feet, trying to make sense of it. My body was buzzing with adrenaline. I had my phone, but I didn't even think to take it out. I was locked onto this thing, staring, trying not to blink, trying not to look away. Behind me, Lena kept calling for me to come back. She was scared, and her voice had that sharp edge people get when their instincts are screaming louder than their thoughts. Eventually, I turned around with her, and we started walking back toward the car. That's when we saw 2 more. They were farther down the shoreline, standing in the water just like the first one. Same tall, narrow shape. Same stillness. They were maybe 5 feet apart, both facing toward us, both in the surf. The part that bothers me most is that we had just walked past that stretch of beach. There is no way we wouldn't have seen them earlier. The beach was wide open. The shoreline was visible. They had not been there. Lena started running. I followed, slower at first because I didn't want to take my eyes off them. I kept looking back until they faded into the darkness and disappeared. After that night, we were both shaken. I tried to explain it away. I looked into everything I could think of. People, animals, reflections, markers in the water, weird shadows. None of it really fit. Then came June 18th. Same beach, same time, right around 10 at night. It had been windy all day, so the ocean was rougher than usual. The waves were choppy, and there was a damp fog hanging low over parts of the beach. When we started the walk, it was still dusk, and because the beach stretches for miles, we could see a long way down the shoreline. It was empty. We walked like normal, though I'll be honest, the first sighting was sitting in the back of my mind the whole time. By the time we reached the turnaround point, it was fully dark. Just stars, moonlight, and the white noise of the surf. On the way back, we saw it again. It had not been there before. I am completely sure of that. This time, it was farther out in the water, maybe knee-deep or waist-deep depending on the slope. A tall, black figure standing in the surf. I could make out the body and arms, but not a face, not clothing, not any detail that made it feel human. This time, I forced myself to take out my phone. I tried recording first, but the flash just lit up the fog and ruined the view. So I switched to night mode on my Samsung and started taking photos. Then I did something I still don't fully understand. I moved toward it. As I got closer, the figure seemed to move backward into deeper water. Not fast, not like it was splashing away. More like it was withdrawing, keeping distance between us. I got maybe 30 or 40 feet from it. I was standing in shallow surf, water around my ankles and shins, taking photos with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. And then this feeling hit me. Do not go closer. It wasn't a thought exactly. It felt heavier than that, like my whole body understood something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. The figure stayed there, watching. The waves were breaking against it, and I could see its body shift slightly with the water. But the movement was wrong. It had these quick, jolting motions, especially in the arms, almost glitchy, like it wasn't fully matching the world around it. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Lena had already started walking back. She was terrified and wanted nothing to do with it. After maybe a minute of taking pictures, I got another strong wave of dread and finally turned and ran after her. We kept looking over our shoulders the whole way back. Later, when I checked the photos, I felt frustrated more than anything. The camera didn't capture what it looked like in person. In the images, it looks thicker, blurrier, almost farther away than it really was. But I know how close I was. I know what I saw standing there. And here's another strange part. 2 nights before that second encounter, we were walking the same beach and saw 3 or 4 boats in the shallows near that exact area. They looked official, maybe police or Coast Guard. They had huge spotlights and were sweeping them across the shoreline and water like they were searching for something. Maybe it was training. Maybe it was some kind of operation. I don't know. But when Lena and I decided to cut the walk short and turn around, the boats turned their spotlights directly onto us. They followed us with the lights the whole way back along the beach, keeping pace until we reached the parking area. I don't know what they were doing. I don't know if we accidentally walked into something we weren't supposed to see. I don't know if it's connected. All I know is that we've seen these figures more than once now, standing in the surf at night, in places where they were not moments earlier. And every time, it feels like they're watching. So I'm asking this genuinely. Has anyone else seen anything like this on a quiet coastline? Tall figures in the water, strange silhouettes, unusual activity offshore. Anything like that? Because I know the Maine coast. I know what belongs there at night. And whatever this is, it doesn't feel like it belongs. I'm sitting in my brother's room right now, saying this with the lights still on, because my hands haven't stopped shaking. I don't really know what we saw tonight. I don't even know what to call it. It started a few days ago. I was in my room at my desk, working on some 3D stuff in Blender, just practicing little models and textures, when I heard this heavy thudding above me. At first, it sounded like footsteps. Then it turned into these sharp knocks, almost like someone was punching the ceiling from the other side. I tried to brush it off. Houses make weird noises. Pipes shift. Maybe something upstairs moved. I told myself all the normal things people tell themselves when they don't want to be scared. But earlier tonight, it came back. I was at my desk again when I heard scratching right above me. Not light scratching either. It sounded like something was clawing at the drywall with real force, scraping over and over like it was trying to get through. I froze for a second, then tried to make it make sense. I thought maybe maintenance workers were in the ceiling space, or maybe someone was fixing something connected to the air vents. I kept telling myself there had to be a boring explanation. Then the scratching moved closer. There's this small open gap near the ceiling in my room where the ventilation system is. I looked up at it, and the sound got louder, faster, more frantic. And then I heard breathing. Not air moving through a vent, not some mechanical hum. Breathing. slow and heavy, right above me. I ran out of my room and went straight to my brother. At first, he didn't take me seriously at all. He told me I was freaking myself out, that it was probably nothing, and that I should just go back. So I did. I sat back down, trying to act normal, but then the breathing changed. It turned into this low, humming sound. Deep, steady, almost like someone was using their throat to make it. It didn't sound like a machine. It sounded alive. That was when I ran out again and basically dragged my brother back with me. This time, he heard it. We stood there under the ceiling while the banging and scratching started again, right above us. Neither of us said anything. We just stared at that little vent opening. Then something came out. At first, I thought it was a tail. That's the closest word I have for it. But it was too thin, too dark, too strange. It was completely black, almost glossy, and it had this pattern on it. Not stripes, not scales exactly, more like tiny connected hexagons all over it. It kept whipping in and out of the hole, fast and violent, like it was feeling around or trying to grab onto the edge. We both lost it. We slammed my bedroom door shut, ran down the hallway, and locked ourselves inside my brother's room. After a few minutes, when we could actually breathe again, I told him I wanted to go back and check. I know that sounds stupid, but part of me was terrified it might be a person somehow. My brother kept saying it was probably a rat, but that made no sense to me. Rats don't have long, pitch-black patterned tails that move like that. I thought maybe it could be some huge lizard or a snake, and honestly, if it's a snake, I'm done. But deep down, it didn't feel like an animal I knew. So we tried something else. We picked up our cat and brought him near the hallway, just to see how he reacted. The second he got close to my room, he panicked. Completely panicked. He twisted out of our arms and bolted away as fast as he could. Right after that, the banging started again. Only this time, it wasn't just in my room. It was moving. We could hear it traveling through the vents, scraping and thudding through the ductwork, getting louder near the hallway, then closer to the door. The sound echoed through the whole house. Whatever it wasn't trapped in one spot. It had access to the ventilation system. We stayed locked in my brother's room until our mom got home. And of course, by the time she walked in, everything was silent. No scratching, no humming, no breathing, nothing. She didn't believe us. Not really. She said we were probably tired, or that the cat had scared us, or that we were turning normal house noises into something bigger. And I get why she said that, because we had no proof. But we both know what we heard. We both saw that thing come out of the vent. As soon as she went to her room, my brother and I went around the house and blocked every vent opening we could find. We covered the gap in my room too. We made sure nothing could come through, at least not easily. It's been quiet for hours now, but I don't want to turn the lights off. I keep listening for the scratching to start again. And I keep thinking about that black tail, or whatever it was, moving in and out of the ceiling like it knew we were watching. Has anyone ever dealt with an animal or pest that looks like that? Something black, thin, patterned, and moving through vents? Or are we dealing with something else entirely? Because I really need someone to tell me what we saw. I'm going to try to tell this as clearly as I can, without letting my thoughts run off in every direction. This happened in Capri, Italy, near the Blue Grotto. It's this underwater cave with a small air opening, and if you swim through the dark, there's a dry, rocky area farther inside. I had a flashlight with me, wrapped inside 2 plastic bags because I was worried about water getting in. My dad had told me there was a little beach inside the cave, And honestly, I was too curious not to see it for myself. So I went in. I swam through, reached the dry part, and it was much bigger than I expected. Not just a tiny patch of rock. I walked for maybe 5 minutes, moving from wet stone to completely dry ground. The strange thing was, there was no echo. None. The cave walls were jagged and uneven, almost like the place swallowed sound instead of bouncing it back. I went down a narrow passage and found what looked like an old hangout spot. There was a rescue float, one of those ring-shaped ones, just sitting there. And then I saw it. I swear to you, I saw a face. It was farther back in the cave, maybe 30 meters away, partly around a bend. My flashlight hit it just right, and I saw 2 eyes reflecting the light. A bald head, the shape of a person. It looked straight out of a nightmare, but not blurry in that way your mind invents things in the dark. It looked real. A face, a person, a body, looking right at me. There was nobody else in that cave. I'm telling you, if someone had been there, I would have seen their things, heard them moving, noticed something. You couldn't just casually set up inside a place like that. Getting supplies through that tiny entrance would be almost impossible. For a second, I wondered if it was something placed there on purpose. Maybe a statue or a figure meant to scare off tourists who went in unprepared. Maybe something old, from when the island had Roman villas and hidden corners everywhere. Or maybe something more recent, put there to keep people away from dangerous parts of the cave. I don't really believe in evil spirits or horror movie things, but part of me wondered if it was some kind of warning. Not something bad exactly. Maybe something saying, "Don't go farther. You're alone in here. This place is not safe." Maybe it showed me the thing that would scare me most. The thought that someone else was deep in the cave with me. I stood there for just a moment, frozen. Then, because I didn't know what else to do, I greeted it in Italian. There was no answer. After about 3 seconds, I turned and got out of there as fast as I could. I slipped on the rocks and cut my leg, but I barely even felt it. I kept climbing, stumbling, looking back over my shoulder again and again. I tried to take a photo of myself at one point, but I was too panicked to stand still. All I could think was that if something lived in that cave, it knew the place much better than I did, and my flashlight was the only thing keeping me from being completely lost. When I finally got out, I said goodbye to the cave. I don't know why. It just felt like something I had to do. And then I told myself I was done. Later that same day, my phone got salt water in it during something unrelated on the boat. I also felt a painful lump in my groin, which turned out to be an extremely swollen lymph node. That night, I barely slept, maybe 3 or 4 hours. The next day was my last full day on the island, and I was completely drained. It felt like everything around me had been telling me not to go into that cave. But even now, back home and far away from Capri, I still think about it. I still want to know what I saw in there. I'm honestly not sure where to begin, so I'll just start with the part that has never really left me. When I was about 12, my older cousin Mara came to stay at my parents' house for a little while. We shared my room, and back then it felt like a sleepover that just kept going. We'd watch TV too late, sneak snacks after everyone else was asleep, and play video games until one of us finally gave up and crashed. She slept on a mattress on the floor, and I remember feeling lucky to have her there. But there was one night that changed everything. After that, she was ready to go home, and she never stayed overnight at our house again. That night started like any other. We did our usual routine, got ready for bed, talked for a bit in the dark, and fell asleep around 9:45. I had this dream that I was at a big shopping center with my mom, Mara, my aunt, and 2 of my uncles. Everything felt normal at first. We were walking around, looking at clothes and random things, when I passed this girl. She smiled at me, not in a friendly way. It was too still, too fixed. I didn't know her. I had never seen her before. But every time I turned a corner, there she was. Every time I looked behind me, she was standing somewhere nearby, smiling at me like she had been waiting for me to notice. Mara saw her too. I remember my cousin glancing back at the girl, then looking at me with this expression like, "You see her too, right?" Eventually, Mara said she had to use the bathroom, so she left the group, and the girl followed her. I stayed with the rest of my family in the dream. We kept shopping like nothing strange had happened. When we were finished, we paid and started heading out. I told everyone Mara still hadn't come back from the bathroom, but they acted completely calm and said, "No, she already went to the car." So I went with them. But when we got to the car, she wasn't there. I remember saying I was going back inside to find her. I started running across the parking lot, and suddenly I heard this awful horn blaring. I turned and saw a truck coming straight toward me. Then I sat up in my bed. Except I was still dreaming. My room was dark and quiet, and the first thing I noticed was that Mara wasn't on the mattress. Her blanket was gone. Her bag was gone. It looked like she had never been there at all. I got up and stepped into the hallway. I started checking rooms as I passed them, calling for her, getting more scared with every second. Then I saw that my parents' bedroom door was slightly open. I pushed it just enough to look inside. I don't want to describe every detail, but what I saw was horrible. My parents were dead, and the room looked like something violent and impossible had happened there. I was 12. I had never imagined anything like that before, and I still wish my mind hadn't been able to make it. Somehow, I made myself run to my little brother's room. When I got there, I saw him being pulled out through the window by a tall man wearing a brown jacket, black pants, and a red cap. The worst part was that he didn't have a face. It was just blank, empty, like someone had erased the part of him that was supposed to be human. My brother was screaming. I ran out the front door, and the air outside was freezing. I saw a red truck parked near the curb. One of the doors slammed shut, and then it sped away. I tried to chase it. And then I woke up for real. I was shaking so badly that I told my mom, even though I didn't want to talk about it. Later that day, I told both of my parents the whole thing. They just stared at me for a second and asked if I was joking. I told them I wasn't. That was when they told me Mara had woken up terrified too, and she had described the same dream, at least up until the part where she left us to go to the bathroom. That's where her dream split off. She said that when she got to the little hallway near the store bathrooms, she passed a man coming out of the men's restroom. Brown jacket, dark pants, red cap, no face. She said he scared her, but he was leaving, and she really had to go, so she kept walking. When she was done, she went to wash her hands. The smiling girl came in and stood at the sink beside her. She turned the water on, but she didn't wash her hands. She just stared at Mara. Then the girl started pulling off her own fingernails. Mara said there was blood running into the sink, and the girl never stopped staring. She tried to leave, but the bathroom door was gone. Not locked. Gone. Like it had never existed. When Mara turned back around, the girl was pulling out her own teeth. Mara started pounding on the wall, thinking maybe somehow it was a prank, even though that didn't make sense. Then the girl screamed at her. Mara fell backward through what felt like a hole in the wall or floor, and suddenly she landed outside on a street. But not my street. It was the street where she had lived when she was little. She knew it immediately. She said she could see her childhood house down the road, so she started running toward it. Then she realized the girl was there too, chasing her. Mara said the street stretched in front of her like it would never end. No matter how hard she ran, her house got farther away. Right before she woke up, she felt the girl's hand brush the back of her neck. That was it. We were both terrified. Not just because the dreams were scary, but because they matched. We remembered the same store, the same girl, the same moment when Mara left for the bathroom. We even remembered little bits of the conversation before everything went wrong. After that, Mara refused to use public bathrooms for years. I started checking the locks before bed, then checking them again. When I got older, I used my own money to buy a taser and a small security camera setup because some part of me still felt like I needed proof that the house was safe. People have tried to explain it. We went to therapy. Someone suggested maybe Mara had insecurities about her appearance, but that never fit. She was pretty, never cared much about makeup, never had dental problems, and she was never into doing her nails anyway. She also wasn't claustrophobic. And for me, scary movies weren't allowed in our house. I was homeschooled, so my parents were careful about what I watched. I didn't know about horror characters or faceless figures like that back then. I didn't know anyone with a red truck. I wasn't afraid of my parents dying either. They had both been in the army, and when I was 12, they seemed completely untouchable to me. So I still don't know what happened. I don't know how two people can fall asleep in the same room and end up in the same dream. But we did. And even now, all these years later, I can still see that girl smiling. I need you to bear with me, because I've tried to figure this out for years. I've searched on my own, and I've even asked people with academic linguistics backgrounds, but nobody has ever been able to give me a direct match. And still, after all this time, it bothers me. Not knowing what was being said that morning has stayed with me. My gut has always told me it was an omen. The word was dekum. Just that. One word. This happened in July of 2009 at a friend's house belonging to my daughter's mom. We had seen my mother the day before, and she had taken our little girl for the weekend. After that, I got ready for another miserable third shift work night. By the time I got back to the house, the sun was just starting to come up. The layout of the place was simple. You came in through the front porch and front door, and the living room was immediately off to the left. If you walked farther in, the dining room was on the right. Then there was a turn toward the bedrooms, and past that, the kitchen sat farther back. When I came in, I was the only person awake. The whole house was quiet. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't make food. I didn't even really move around much. I just sat down on this couch in the living room, one of those couches that sits strangely low to the ground, almost like it is trying to keep you close to the floor. At first, nothing felt wrong. Then I heard footsteps. They came from the back of the house, from somewhere near the kitchen or the bedrooms. They weren't stomping, but they were clear. Slow, steady, deliberate steps. Whoever it was, they were walking through the dining room toward me. There was a corner between us, so I couldn't see them yet, but I was completely sure a person was about to come around it. I mean, I was waiting for a human being. That was the only thing that made sense. But the footsteps stopped right at the corner, and nobody came around. I just sat there, staring at that empty threshold, confused. The silence stretched out in this awful way, like the whole house was holding its breath. Then a voice spoke. The best way I can describe it is a robotic child's voice, but darker than that, wronger than that. It sounded small and mechanical, and almost demonic all at the same time. And it didn't come from the hallway or the kitchen. It came from right in front of me, low, around eye level because of that sunken couch, maybe a foot or two away from my knees. It said, "De cum." That was it. One word, and every part of me immediately said, absolutely not. I got up and left the house. I didn't try to investigate. I didn't call out. I didn't go looking for a speaker, a person, a prank, anything. I just got out of there and went to a park, where I stayed for hours until my daughter's mom woke up and called me. For years, I couldn't find anything that explained that word. I hated even saying it out loud, but my brain never let it go. It was burned in there. A decade passed, and still nobody could tell me what it meant. The feeling I had, though, never changed. It felt old, ancient almost, and the way it was spoken felt so final, so matter-of-fact, that I couldn't shake the sense that it had been a warning, or a bad omen. Years later, I was telling the story to a friend of mine, Mara. She's a professional writer and has spent a lot of her life around language and research. I told her about the word and how it had always been a mystery. She said there can be a lot of nuance with Latin, but what she recognized sounded close to decum or deacum, something connected to 10 or tenth in the sense of the 10th year, not just a fraction like 1/10. And the moment she said that, my mind made the connection almost instantly. 10 years after that July morning, in July of 2019, my brother died here at home. An overdose. It was devastating. Now, I'm not saying with absolute certainty that this is what the word meant. Language is complicated, and my friend and I couldn't prove it. But it checked too many boxes for me to ignore. It sounded like an omen when I heard it. Latin has that old association with demonic things, whether people believe that or not. And the timing, 10 years to the same month, was just too strange. One more thing, too. The house where this happened was less than a mile from another house I lived in as a child. A house my family was basically driven out of by things I can only describe as demonic. This was all in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. Maybe that land has something wrong with it. Maybe it's cursed. I don't know. But I do know this. I heard that word. I heard those footsteps. And after all these years, I still remember exactly how it felt. Hey there. I want to share with you a story from my childhood that's been with me for years. Something that really shook me and my family. It's about the time when I was around 7 years old, and the strange things began after my older sister and her friends decided to play with a Ouija board. Now, I wasn't part of the game. I just watched from the sidelines. But somehow, something attached itself to me that night. Almost right away, weird activity started happening around our trailer home. Our cats, who were usually so calm and sweet, suddenly started hissing and swatting at thin air like they could see something we couldn't. Our dog, who was so brave and loyal, began having panic attacks, especially near doorways. He would snarl and bark at nothing visible, going into full defense mode. It was like he was protecting us from some invisible threat. The very next night, after the Ouija board session, the pictures hanging in our living room and those resting on the entertainment center had been moved. Even the candles my mom kept scattered around the living and kitchen areas were shifted. No one actually saw anything move, but everyone, my mom, my sister, and I, heard strange noises throughout the night. But nobody got up to check what was going on. My sister and I knew exactly what was happening, but my mom thought we were just up messing with the furniture and yelled at us, accusing us of rearranging everything. Months passed, and one night we had one of those classic Anchorage storms. Rain, thunder, and lightning crashing all around. I had a friend over, let's call him Ian. That's not his real name, by the way. We were in my room, playing Army Men 3D on the old PS1, the blinds up so we could watch the lightning flash outside. The rumble of thunder filled the air, making the whole trailer shake ever so slightly. Suddenly, there was this loud smack against my window. We both jumped, startled. At first, we thought maybe lightning had struck nearby, but then I told Ian it was probably just a bird flying into the glass. Moments later, the storm stopped. The rain ceased, the thunder rolled away, and the lightning faded. But then, condensation gathered on the window, and something chilling appeared. The outline of a person's face, chest, and arms sprawled across the glass. Ian started crying, begging his mom to come get him. He eventually went upstairs, telling his mom and my mom that he'd had a nightmare. Now, our trailer was raised about 6 or 7 feet off the ground, making it unlikely for someone to just lean on the window. And sure, we had neighborhood kids who liked to prank us, and some creeps who had been caught peeking through windows. But this imprint didn't look human. The nose looked torn off, lips partially missing, and the arms seemed unnaturally long, like something out of a nightmare. I never spoke about that until just a couple of years ago. Then there were the headphone incidents. On 3 separate occasions, my sister's Walkman headphones had their cords mysteriously cut. Each time, I wasn't home, and she was either at a friend's or in the shower. At first, my mom and sister thought I was playing a prank on her, but after the 3rd time, I proved to them that neither of us were around when it happened. That's when they really started to believe something strange was going on. One day, my grandmother came to visit to help take care of us. While rummaging through the closet looking for a mousetrap, she found the Ouija board. She completely lost it, telling us in no uncertain terms that the board wasn't a toy and that by playing with it, we had opened doors we shouldn't have. She destroyed the board right then and there and blessed our entire house. After she told my mom everything, my mom found out that my sister had bought the board from an estate sale just down the street, which she hadn't known about. That night, I stayed at my dad's house to get away from all the tension at home. The next day, when I returned, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone was on edge and barely talking. Then my sister came into my room and said, "Grandma saw a ghost boy last night in Mom's room." I didn't believe her at first, but then she described what happened. Grandma had woken up at 3 a.m. to find the hallway light being turned up painfully bright and then dimmed all the way down. When she tried to get up to put on her slippers, she heard the door creak open wider and thought she saw me there. She called out, but I didn't answer. When she got close enough, she realized it wasn't me, and she screamed. She described the boy as wearing an early 1900s sailor suit, with pale gray skin, dark rings around his eyes and lips, and a haunting grin before vanishing. That night, my mom, grandma, and sister all slept in the same bed. For a while, things calmed down, just the occasional cupboard opening and closing by itself, footsteps in the hallway, and voices calling out our names from other rooms. Then, 3 months later, my mom found out she was going to have another baby. We were all thrilled, but because of money and space, we had to find new homes for our dog and cats. We had a week to shower them with love before they moved to a family with a big yard and acres to roam. One day, I was playing with little Bob, our Jack Russell Terrier. We had this game where I'd throw a blanket over myself, and he'd pull it off, then cover himself, and I'd pull it off him. It was a simple game, but we loved it. As I threw the blanket over myself, everything suddenly went eerily quiet. Little Bob started to whimper and growl at something unseen. Before I could pull the blanket off, I heard a deep, raspy old man's breathing right behind me, followed by a loud exhale. I froze, couldn't move a muscle, while little Bob tried to protect me. Then he jumped into my lap, and the sense of presence disappeared. Fast forward 6 months. My baby sister had arrived, and we were enjoying a quiet evening. I was in the day room, the extra living space we added onto the trailer, while my mom and her friend Yolanda were in the main living room watching TV. Yolanda was softly singing to my newborn sister in Spanish when suddenly, I heard my mom and Yolanda scream, followed by my mom shouting my name. I ran down the hallway, heart pounding, fearing something had happened to my sister. But my mom stopped me and told me to go to my room and grab my Halloween skull face plate mask, the one with horns running across the top. Confused, I fetched it and brought it to her. She snatched it and threw it in the trash. Still puzzled, I asked what was going on. My mom sat me down while Yolanda prayed quietly in Spanish, soothing the baby. Then my mom said, "I saw something crawling down the hallway on all fours. Its limbs looked twisted like they were dislocated, and it was wearing that mask you just gave me. Please tell me that was you trying to scare us." I told her no way, it wasn't me. I started to cry, scared out of my mind. Both my mom and Yolanda saw it, and they also saw me come out of the day room. That night, we all slept together in my mom's room. So, that's the story. My childhood haunted by something beyond understanding. It's left me with a deep respect for the unknown and a reminder that some things are better left alone. Hey, I want to share a story with you. Something that's been on my mind for a while. It's about my grandmother and some eerie experiences we've had, and how those moments have lingered in my family's history. So, get comfortable, and I'll take you through it. After my grandmother first encountered that ghostly boy in her room, things settled down for a bit. But the silence didn't last forever. The last time we really noticed any supernatural activity was up in the far north, at this place called the Copper River Lodge, not too far from Copper Center, Alaska. My grandmother used to work there way back, I think sometime in the early 70s. She told me stories about a man named Charles, Charlie for short, who tragically took his own life in the hotel. Ever since then, his spirit has been said to haunt the lodge. Now, my grandmother and her sisters, who also worked there, used to experience some pretty unsettling things. They'd feel their hair being tugged or feel hands grabbing them in the dark, sometimes on their backsides, which they thought was Charles messing around as a shadowy figure. Can you imagine how creeped out they must have been? Years later, in the late 2000s, my family and I got the chance to explore the Copper River Lodge when it was still in a bit of a rundown state. It had gone through renovations since, and now it's up and running again. When I visited, they had kept Charles's room almost exactly as he'd left it. The rope he used to hang himself still hung there, and around the noose on his bed, people had left flowers, cards, cigarettes, even some magazines and money, as a sign of respect, I suppose. One evening, while we were there, we thought we heard voices drifting through the halls. My grandmother swore she saw a face peering through one of the windows from outside the lodge, but that part's up for debate. What I did manage to capture, though, was something wild. A giant red orb floating just above my youngest sister's head in a photo. She was staring right at it. If you look closely, you can almost make out a face inside that orb. My grandmother has that photo somewhere. I'm planning to reach out to her this weekend and see if she can dig it up for me. Fast forward to 2008. I was about 14 then, living with my dad. Odd things started happening around his apartment. Small, but unsettling. My favorite Misfits beanie would vanish, along with my dad's and stepmom's keys. One moment, they'd be hanging right on the hooks by the door, and the next, completely gone. The apartment wasn't huge, just 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, kitchen, and living room. So finding missing things shouldn't have been a challenge. We'd all split up to search, but after an hour or so, we'd give up. Then, just when we were about to relax on the couch, we'd hear the jingle of keys back on the hook, or the soft thud of my hat landing on the floor. It was like the things were playing hide and seek with us. Months went by without any incidents, until one night I had this intense dream. I was a corpsman on Iwo Jima, running through tall grass, hearing a Marine call out for help. I rushed to him, trying to treat his wounds, only to realize he was already dead. Then, someone shouted behind me, "Tenoheka Banzai!" I spun around and saw a Japanese soldier camouflaged as a bush. He stabbed me with a bayonet right through the chest. Then I woke up, gasping, and my chest hurt like crazy. When I looked down, I saw a huge red scratch running from just above my left nipple all the way to my belly button. My dad even took a picture of it, but I don't have it anymore. My grandmother and a few family members who have a knack for the supernatural think it might have been a sign from one of my past lives. Maybe they're right. I've always been intrigued by reincarnation, especially since I've found old photos of people throughout history who look almost exactly like me. Then came the summer of 2009. I landed my very first job as housekeeping at the Copper River Princess Lodge. It sits on land that was once sacred native territory, used for ceremonies long ago. Family members who worked there before me told stories about a blonde girl in a white dress who wanders through the hotel and sometimes the parking lot. Guests who see her often think she's lost and try to approach her, but by the time they get close, she's vanished. One day, after finishing cleaning a room, a guest complained about people on the third floor being rude and moving furniture constantly. I was confused. I told him the lodge only has 2 floors. His eyes widened, and he hurried back to his room to pack up and leave. That was pretty eerie. If you've ever worked in hospitality, you probably know about norovirus. It's brutal. You end up spending days hugging the toilet in a bucket. I was home alone one day during a 4-day bout of the virus. My grandmother's dog was sleeping beside me when he suddenly started growling and barking at the door. I figured maybe someone had come over, so I stumbled out of bed and opened the door. Nobody there. I called out, but no answer. Crawling back into bed, the dog started barking and growling again at the door. Thinking he might need to go out, I opened it once more. But he backed away, growling, as a cold chill ran down my spine. The room suddenly felt like a winter night, the kind where the windows open during a snowstorm. I shut the door, pulled the blanket over me, trying to convince myself it was just the virus messing with me. Then I heard footsteps pacing up and down the hallway, slow and deliberate, like someone impatiently waiting. I opened the door, and the footsteps stopped. I looked both ways, called out. Nothing. The room grew cold again, and I noticed my breath forming a mist in the air, which just wasn't normal for July. As I reached to close the door, I saw another breath form right in front of me. Someone else's. Panic hit me like a wave. I slammed the door, locked it, and shoved my suitcase and anything else I could find in front of it. The dog was going wild on the bed, barking, lunging at the door, frantic and scared. After a while of silence, I crawled back into bed with him and fell asleep. But when I woke up, everything blocking the door was moved aside, and the door was unlocked. I called out again. No one. I called my grandmother to see if she'd been by, but she wasn't home. She'd been shopping in Glen Allen and checking on my grandpa. I decided I wasn't staying in the house that night. I grabbed the dog, a pillow, and a blanket, and slept in the hammock outside until my grandparents returned. When I told my grandmother, she was more upset that I'd slept outside during the day, worried a bear might get me. My grandparents believe me, but they've lived in that house since the 1970s and have never experienced anything like what I did. By 2010, my mom had moved out of the trailer park into a nice 2-story house. The first 6 months were quiet. Then, after the birth of my youngest sister, strange things began again. My mom had this water bottle that kept disappearing and reappearing in odd spots around the house. She had my grandmother stay with her and my other younger sister, Julia, sleep on a fold-out bed nearby because of strange noises, disembodied voices, and footsteps echoing through the hallway outside my mom's room. I stayed over for a week to help out and slept in Julia's room across the hall. It was around 3:45 a.m. when I was jolted awake by my grandmother shouting at someone to get out. At first, I thought she was yelling at my mom's boyfriend, but when I rushed in, everyone was huddled on the bed crying. The ghost boy from the trailer, the one in the sailor suit, had returned. My grandmother woke up to find him standing over Julia, then turning and pointing at the newborn baby. She told him firmly, "No, you are not a child. You're a sick, disgusting demon, and you will not harm my grandbabies, my daughter, or me. Leave now before I show you something scary." She shared this with my mom and me privately, so Julia wouldn't be scared. When she said demon, the boy's face twisted into something horrifying, like an old man's face with no nose and half of his lips missing on one side. Then he lunged at my grandmother, who screamed, "Get out! You're not welcome here!" After that, my mom lived in that house for another 4 years. The activity was minimal, just occasional voices and footsteps, nothing like before. So yeah, that's the story. Our family's brush with the supernatural, tied to places and spirits from long ago. It's left me wondering about the thin veil between this world and the next, and the echoes of past lives that might still walk among us. Thanks for listening.